In a world ruled by magic, one man dares to challenge destiny. With fire, steel, and invention, he will forge machines that rival the gods. But when industry rises, will magic fall? This is the dawn of a new empire.
The scene opened in the emergency room of a hospital, where urgency saturated the air. A doctor's assistant, visibly unsettled, rushed to report that the patient was struggling to breathe. The doctor, without hesitation, ordered a ventilator, his voice sharp with urgency. On the bed lay Jin Lashan, a mechanical engineer whose body had been pushed to its limits after years of relentless overwork. His heart had suffered a stroke, and now he hovered on the brink of death. From the very start of his life, Jin had known only hardship. His parents had perished in a car accident, leaving him orphaned. After graduating, he spent 2 decades chained to a company, enduring a grueling routine for pitiful wages. Love had remained a stranger to him, as he had never experienced the warmth of a woman's affection. The doctor called out Jin's name with urgency, yet Jin's thoughts were far away. He questioned the meaning of his existence, wondering what purpose all his years of struggle had served. The doctor's calls grew sharper, but Jin did not answer. The medical team rushed to use the AED, yet his vision was already blurring. An overwhelming fatigue settled deep in his bones, urging him to let go. For the first time, he felt it might be time to rest. Darkness claimed him. The world shifted. Jin opened his eyes to find himself lying in a lavish royal mansion. The ornate furnishings and opulent surroundings suggested wealth beyond anything he had known. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was a hospital and dreaded the medical expenses such care would incur. His thoughts were interrupted by a glowing notification appearing before him, welcoming him to the magical continent of Eldera. Instinctively, he tried to touch it, but a sharp pain coursed through his body, forcing him to stop. Turning his gaze to a nearby mirror, he froze. The face staring back at him was not his own. The unfamiliar features unsettled him, leaving him questioning how such a transformation had occurred. A week passed, and he slowly adapted to this strange new reality. While seated in his chambers, a maid of striking beauty entered and respectfully informed him that the tea was ready. She addressed him as her master and introduced herself as Leah. During that week, Jin came to understand his situation. He had died and been reborn as Rain Edgar, the third son of Duke Aldarian Edgar. His new life came with an elder brother and a sister, as well as the warmth of a household that treated him with genuine kindness. At the family dining table, exquisite dishes awaited him daily. His mother presented him with a finely tailored jacket as a gesture of affection. Cherished as the youngest in the family, he began to believe that perhaps this happiness was the balm for the misery he had endured in his former life. Eldera, the vast continent he now inhabited, was a world ruled by magic. The Caradorial Empire stood as the largest human dominion, though it shared the land with numerous races, including elves and dwarves. The Edgar family's influence stretched across an immense territory, home to nearly 1 million people and spanning over 300,000 square kilometers. With noble status came access to every comfort and the dedicated service of Leah, his personal maid. Rain began to see this life as a reward for the struggles he had once faced. That sense of peace, however, shifted when Leah entered one day to inform him that the Duke wished to see him. He made his way to the study, where the butler announced his arrival before he stepped inside. Duke Aldarian greeted him with a grave expression. The conversation soon turned to matters of responsibility. Rain had reached the age where he would be expected to manage his own territory. The sudden announcement left him momentarily without words. His father, sensing his hesitation, explained further. The territory assigned to him lay in the northwest, a region secure, yet plagued by a severe food shortage due to the absence of mages. Duke Aldarian's voice carried a weightier tone as he spoke of the broader troubles within the empire. Though the Edgar domain remained stable, the empire faced decline. The royal family's influence waned, corruption spread unchecked, and rivalries among the lords grew more dangerous. Rain listened, recognizing the truth in his father's words. Since his arrival in this world, he had felt a warmth and sense of belonging that had been absent all his life. That realization strengthened his resolve. He silently vowed never to lose the people who now mattered most to him. Perceiving his son's thoughts, the Duke reassured him that his siblings and the family as a whole would always stand by him. Yet Rain's mind remained focused on the immediate problem. He pondered the link between food supply and the region's stability. Solving the shortage might also strengthen the area's long-term security. Duke Aldarion, however, reminded him that such matters were far more complex than they appeared. In his father's eyes, Rain's concern reflected the idealism of inexperience. Yet Rain refused to be deterred. Drawing upon his knowledge from his former life, he believed that advances in industry and production could change the situation. Determined, he assured his father that he would find a way to resolve the crisis. Ashling City marked the westernmost point of the Edgar family's territory. To its north lay hostile lands, while the western border touched the domain of the elves. The vast ocean formed its southern edge. Positioned at the crossroads of three nations, the city had endured centuries as a contested battleground. Repeated wars had stripped its fields of fertility and reduced its population to a fraction of what it once was. Only a scattering of residents remained to call it home. Inside the carriage bound for Ashling City, Rain considered the obstacles ahead. For the industrial transformation he envisioned, a substantial labor force would be essential. Achieving that required first increasing the population. As his thoughts moved from one possibility to another, a translucent notification suddenly materialized before him. It was his ability interface. The system urged him to activate its scanning function, a tool capable of revealing the statistics of any person he examined. He had tested it on members of the Edgar family and had already gained a basic understanding of the people in this world. His objective upon arrival was straightforward. He would seek out and recruit capable individuals who could help him realize his plans. Leah, seated across from him, watched in silence. Her mind went back to the instructions Duke Aldarion had given her before departure. She was to keep a close watch on Rain, ensuring he did not act recklessly. Though she trusted his intentions, she hoped he would avoid unnecessary trouble. Far away, within the Lord's mansion in Anselin City, a figure reported that Rain's arrival was imminent. His presence stirred unease, and the question was raised whether action should be taken. Rumors circulated that Duke Aldarion favored his youngest son to an excessive degree, and Rain was equally cherished by his elder siblings. The masked man listening to the report, however, dismissed any immediate intervention, insisting they await their master's orders. The subordinate hesitated before voicing a deeper concern. If Rain were to uncover the financial fraud they had been orchestrating, their scheme could collapse. The masked man scoffed at the notion, convinced that a pampered young noble like Rain would have no knowledge of tax records or accounting. His plan was simple: present Rain with deliberately misleading financial ledgers upon his arrival to confuse and mislead him. Satisfied with this approach, he ordered preparations for Rain's reception. A smirk touched his lips as he murmured that the time had come for Aldarion Edgar to pay for his crimes. When Rain's carriage finally rolled into Ashling City, his first impression was one of stark desolation. Streets lay quiet, buildings worn, and signs of neglect stretched in every direction. Wasting no time, he requested a map. Leah quickly handed it over, and he studied the layout with care. The idea of constructing a canal that could connect the inland areas to the seaport began to take shape in his mind. Such a project could breathe new life into the struggling city. Before he could explore the thought further, a commotion nearby drew his attention. A young woman was pleading with her father, her voice shaking with desperation. She begged him to stop gambling, insisting that the money he clutched was meant for her mother's medical treatment. Tears streamed down her face, yet the man remained unmoved. He made a clumsy attempt to wrest the coins from her grasp, muttering about a certain win this time. She resisted with all her strength, but his frustration mounted until he raised his hand to strike her. Rain stepped in before the blow could land. He struck the man with a solid punch, feeling the sting in his knuckles yet refusing to back down. Leah hurried to his side, her voice sharp with concern. She scolded him for acting without warning, reminding him that she could have prepared his protective gear had he informed her. Rain dismissed her worry, explaining there had been no time for preparations in such a situation. He then instructed her to attend to the girl while he confronted the gambler. Turning back to the man, Rain's expression hardened. He demanded to know whether the gambler had lost all sense. The man, now pale with fear, demanded to know Rain's identity. Rain told him it did not matter who he was, only that if the man dared to gamble again, he would personally ensure the punishment was severe. The threat carried enough weight to send the man scrambling away, shouting promises never to gamble again. With the matter settled, Rain returned his attention to the girl. He asked if she was unharmed, then activated his scanning ability. The results startled him. Her potential was remarkable. She possessed a wholly agricultural body, an incredibly rare trait capable of transforming farming productivity. For Rain, she represented the possibility of solving one of the region's greatest challenges. He invited her to join him on the journey into town, explaining they were headed there regardless. The girl hesitated, glancing at the carriage and murmuring that she might soil its interior. Rain dismissed the concern entirely. Her value to his plans far outweighed such trivialities. As they resumed the journey, another thought troubled him. He could not understand why a casino even existed in a city where the people were barely surviving. The image of the girl's tear-streaked face stayed in his mind, reinforcing his belief that change in Ashling City could not wait. The previous autumn, the Duke of the neighboring enemy nation had launched a sudden assault on the town, leading to the deaths of many soldiers. As winter gave way to spring, disaster struck again. A devastating flood swept through the region, destroying most of the crops and plunging the people into hardship. With their harvests ruined, even finding a single meal became a struggle. Rain considered the situation carefully. If he wanted to restore the region, he first needed to know its productive strength. A census would be essential to understand how many workers could contribute to rebuilding efforts. However, before committing to any plans, he decided to visit the Lord's estate to learn how much funding was available for development. He turned to Lillian and asked about the estate's finances. Before she could respond, the sharp sound of hooves tore through the street. A man on horseback charged through the crowd, forcing pedestrians to leap aside. Leah reacted instantly, pulling Rain out of the way, preventing him from being struck. As the rider passed, Leah's eyes narrowed on him, her expression unreadable. Rain took a moment to catch his breath before assuring her he was fine. Once composed, Rain asked Lillian if she recognized the rider. She explained that the man was the young master of the Eldren family, the owners of every casino in the city. From that information alone, Rain concluded they must possess immense wealth. A thought surfaced in his mind: their fortune might be the answer to his shortage of development funds. Without hesitation, he told Lillian to take him to the casino. Lillian's expression darkened. She warned him that stepping into such a place would almost certainly end with him being cheated. Rain brushed aside her concern, telling her that he was not afraid of the risk. Lillian fell silent, watching him with a mix of apprehension and curiosity, wondering just how capable he truly was. Upon arriving at the casino, Rain stepped inside and was met with a cacophony of noise. The gambling hall buzzed with the cries of winners and the groans of those who had lost everything. Excitement and desperation mingled in the air. Some gamblers clutched their winnings with trembling hands, while others stared blankly at empty tables. Rain quickly understood the danger such places posed. Where gambling thrived, people would never dedicate themselves to work. Leah approached quietly and informed him that their group had surrounded the building. Rain instructed her to wait, deciding instead to draw out the true person of interest. A neatly dressed staff member approached and, with polite formality, asked what game he wished to play. Rain replied that he preferred something simple. The attendant led him to a table, offering him 2 complimentary chips to try his luck. The game began, and the surrounding staff exchanged knowing glances. Rain placed his first bet, fully aware the outcome would be rigged. When the dice were checked, the result confirmed his suspicion: he had lost. The attendant, still wearing a pleasant smile, encouraged him to continue playing. The act held no entertainment for Rain, and he decided he had seen enough. As he turned to leave, the staff member stepped into his path, declaring that Rain owed payment for the chips. Raising an eyebrow, Rain asked how such a debt could exist when the chips had been given to him for free. The man smirked and told him that nothing in the casino came without cost. Each chip, he claimed, was valued at 100 gold coins. With the addition of service charges, Rain now supposedly owed 250 gold coins. The staff member's smile widened as he suggested that Rain could leave his maid as collateral if he could not pay. Before Rain could speak, Lillian stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm as she stated the truth, that each chip was worth only a single silver coin. The staff member's face tightened, embarrassment quickly turning into anger. He ordered one of the guards to silence her. Before the guard could act, Rain moved. His punch landed with crushing force, sending the staff member sprawling into a nearby table. Coins scattered across the floor, and the gamblers who had been watching dove in to snatch them up. Rain demanded to know who had allowed the man to speak in the first place. As the scene momentarily froze, Rain observed the other gamblers scrambling for the coins. Their desperate actions revealed how hopeless their lives had become. At that moment, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, the young master of the Eldren family. His presence confirmed that Rain's plan had worked. A slow, confident smile formed on Rain's lips. The person he had been waiting for had finally stepped forward. The gamblers froze in terror, their eyes fixed on Viserlo as he gave a cold, merciless order to his guards. Without hesitation, the guards moved in, striking the defenseless gamblers who pleaded desperately for mercy. The casino's atmosphere grew heavy with fear, the sound of fists meeting flesh echoing through the room. Viserlo's voice cut through the chaos, warning everyone that further disobedience would lead to harsher punishment. Lillian stood among the crowd, horror etched on her face. She had not expected the situation to spiral into such danger, and the realization struck her that she had led Rain straight into this hostile environment. Yet the memory of him saving her mother burned vividly in her mind, driving her to step forward. The onlookers exchanged murmurs, convinced that she was about to make a grave mistake. Many believed her intervention would lead only to her own beating. Viserlo narrowed his eyes, demanding to know her purpose. Lillian's voice rang with conviction as she accused his casino of scamming the weak, destroying families, and preying on the vulnerable. She declared that she would not allow him to intimidate Rain. Amused by her defiance, Viserlo lifted his hand, intent on striking her. Lillian closed her eyes tightly, bracing herself for the blow. It never came. Rain's hand shot forward with effortless precision, catching Viserlo's wrist mid-swing. As he held him in place, Rain's gaze sharpened, scanning the man before him. What he saw revealed everything. Viserlo possessed no real talent, and his loyalty rating was an abysmal 5. The meaning was clear: the Eldren family's allegiance could collapse at any moment. Viserlo scoffed, mocking Rain for disapproving of his methods. To his surprise, Rain's calm reply claimed otherwise, though his tone carried an edge of irony. He then asked whether Viserlo even understood who he was. Viserlo dismissed the question, stating that titles meant nothing to him. Rain's lips curled faintly as he responded that there was only one thing Viserlo needed to know. With a slow, deliberate clap of his hands, the casino doors swung open. Soldiers poured into the room in disciplined formation. The gamblers and onlookers fell silent. Rain's voice carried a cold finality as he declared that his word was law. The scene shifted to a lavish banquet hall, where wealthy aristocrats mingled over fine wine and polished silverware. One noble expressed hope that his daughter might draw Rain's attention, thereby securing a valuable connection. Eldren, standing nearby, scoffed at the attempt, calling it a cheap ploy to leech off Rain's success. A woman raised her glass in a casual toast toward Eldren, who speculated aloud about Viserlo's absence. If Viserlo arrived soon, Eldren believed they could collaborate to build a profitable relationship with Rain. Yet in his heart, he knew better than to rely entirely on the town's lord. Rain's entrance commanded immediate attention. The heads of various noble families moved quickly to greet him, their hands offering extravagant gifts in hopes of winning his favor. Rain brushed past their gestures with little interest and instead signaled for the meeting to begin. Servants entered carrying a large whiteboard, upon which Rain revealed a carefully drawn blueprint. The nobles leaned forward in curiosity. The design was unfamiliar to all of them. Rain explained that it was a dam. Observing their puzzled expressions, he assured them that the purpose would soon be clear. At his request, Leah stepped forward with a map. Using it as reference, Rain described how the city endured devastating floods each year. By constructing a dam at a strategic point, they could control the water flow, protecting the city and its farmland. Eldren's initial skepticism began to waver. If the floods were stopped, the city's food shortages could also be resolved. It became clear to him that Rain was far more capable and visionary than he had assumed. One of the noble family heads interrupted, questioning why they should concern themselves with the project. Rain's answer was direct: he needed their funding. Almost immediately, the nobles rejected his request, offering shallow excuses about their own financial limitations. Eldren remarked aloud that Rain was naive to believe such men would part with their wealth without force. Rain remained unfazed. He revealed that he had already secured an initial sum, having raided a casino earlier that morning and seized 50,000 gold coins. He then asked how many other casinos operated in the city. The question silenced the room. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying their unease. All of them had investments tied to the casinos, and Rain's bold action had just threatened their profits. Eldren, hiding his growing anger, called Rain a fool for breaking the law. The other nobles quickly joined in, claiming that casinos were legal businesses and that his raid was an unlawful act. They pressed him to apologize, arguing that his actions revealed his inexperience. Eldren added that Rain clearly did not understand how to truly control people. Rain's eyes narrowed. His voice cut sharply through the rising protests as he accused them of lying about their financial state while hoarding immense wealth. His ultimatum was uncompromising: they would either surrender their ill-gotten gains willingly, or he would take them by force. Eldren issued a final warning, stating that Rain's father would not look kindly on such reckless behavior. The nobles intensified their pressure, expecting him to bend. Instead, a smirk touched Rain's lips. If they wished to speak of the law, he would gladly oblige. With a single command, he ordered his soldiers to seize the assembled nobles. His tone carried the weight of authority as he stated that they would have ample time to discuss the law behind bars. Eldren narrowed his eyes as he noticed Viserlo's underlings standing restrained among Rain's captives. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. These men were known to remain constantly at Viserlo's side, yet here they stood, bound before him. Rain, keeping his composure, questioned whether Eldren recognized them without hesitation. Eldren firmly denied any association and demanded to know Rain's intentions. Rain then revealed the truth with an unshaken voice. Earlier that afternoon, the captives had attempted to assassinate him, and under interrogation, they had confessed that someone from Ashling City had been supporting them. A subtle unease passed through Eldren's expression before he quickly concealed it. Rain ordered the soldiers to release the men, yet the urgency in his tone was not lost on those present. The gathered family heads exchanged wary glances, each realizing that these men were closely tied to Viserlo. Eldren found himself in a predicament from which he could not escape. Understanding the threat they posed to his family, he acted decisively. Without hesitation, he drew a dagger and lunged forward, killing the assassins before they could speak further. The banquet hall fell silent as their lifeless bodies collapsed to the floor, blood pooling at Eldren's feet. Eldren stood before the corpses, masking his calculation beneath a facade of regret, claiming that his actions were driven by uncontrollable anger. Rain acknowledged Eldren's decisiveness with a slight bow of his head. Eldren accepted the words humbly, stating he was unworthy of such praise, yet Rain's gaze remained cold and unmoved. Without delay, Rain commanded the soldiers to bring forth the true instigator. Eager to determine whether there were other nobles of Eldren's caliber, the doors to the hall swung open, and Viserlo was dragged inside. Viserlo's face twisted with fury as he struggled against the soldiers holding him. He shouted threats, demanding to be released. Eldren's eyes widened in shock at the sight of his son in chains. Viserlo's anger was directed entirely at Rain, cursing him for daring to kill his men. He swore revenge, declaring that he would destroy Rain and make him beg for death. Rain, unaffected by the threats, merely arched a brow at Viserlo's display of arrogance. Viserlo continued, proclaiming that no one in Ashling City could stand against him and that Rain's death would be inevitable should he wish it. The bold claim drew only amusement. Rain laughed, finding the misplaced confidence almost entertaining, before turning his gaze toward Eldren. Before Eldren could react, Viserlo, still drowning in his own arrogance, turned to his father and addressed him mockingly. The sound of his name leaving Viserlo's lips was the final breach of Eldren's patience. His voice became cold as he ordered Viserlo to kneel. Confusion clouded Viserlo's face, but before he could speak, Eldren forced him to the ground. The weight of the moment crashed down upon Viserlo, and for the first time, fear crept into his expression. Kneeling beside his son, Eldren lowered his head in submission and pleaded for Rain's forgiveness, offering everything in his possession in exchange for their lives. Viserlo's earlier confidence began to crumble as the memory of his father's warnings returned with full force. His body trembled as he finally realized the enormity of his mistake. In a trembling voice, he asked if Rain was the son of the Grand Duke. The answer was clear from the oppressive presence before him, and the truth shattered his arrogance completely. Viserlo dropped to his knees beside his father, begging for mercy. Eldren followed, swearing his family's loyalty to Rain. Rain considered their offer carefully before presenting his condition. Everything they had gained through illegal means must be surrendered, and only then would he permit them to leave alive. Eldren, finding no other option, accepted with outward gratitude, relieved that there was still a chance for survival. Yet his thoughts remained sharp, already searching for a way to divert attention from himself. His gaze fell on Eldric, and a new plan began to take shape. With an air of urgency, Eldren accused the city lord of conspiring with outside forces to betray the Grand Duke. The hall erupted in murmurs as nobles exchanged suspicious glances. Before Eldren could build upon his claim, Rain's expression hardened, his voice carrying a cutting finality. He condemned Eldren's attempt to slander Eldric and gave an immediate order for his execution. Panic surged through Eldren at the pronouncement. Meanwhile, Eldric stood calm, though beneath the surface his mind was calculating. He judged Rain's decision as reckless and impulsive, noting how easily such an individual might be influenced. Stepping forward with practiced ease, Eldrick offered his gratitude to Rain and pledged unwavering loyalty. Rain acknowledged the gesture, assuring Eldrick that betrayal would never be tolerated. Quietly, Rain activated his scanning ability, his eyes assessing Eldrick with precision. What he found was telling. Within Eldrick, the attribute of greed burned strongly, concealed beneath a carefully constructed mask of loyalty. Inside his chamber, Rain carefully reviewed his recent earnings, calculating that his wealth had grown to nearly 100,000 gold coins, a sum equal to 2 years' worth of taxes for his city. Leah entered the room, carrying his usual black tea. As she handed him the cup, he questioned whether she truly understood the extent of the noble's excesses and indulgence. Leah then shifted the topic to a more pressing concern. She asked about Eldren's claim and expressed her fear that if the city lord Eldrick intended to rebel, Rain's life could be in danger. Rain reassured her without hesitation, explaining that he was fully aware of Eldrick's treacherous intentions. However, he was biding his time. When she pressed him for details, he revealed that he still did not know who Eldrick was working for. Unlike his hidden enemies, Rain stood openly exposed, and a single misstep could throw everything into disorder. For the moment, it was best for Eldrick to continue believing that Rain was nothing more than an ignorant, wealthy youth. The next day, the guild master, Malcolm, scoffed at a suggestion placed before him, dismissing it as nonsense. Eldrick urged him to remain calm, insisting that Rain was only young and eager to prove himself to his father. Malcolm, unconvinced, warned against siding with Rain and reminded Eldrick that even Rain's father would have to show respect to the wizards. Eldrick, meanwhile, had been considering ways to bribe the wizards, yet now Rain had drawn their attention by initiating a controversial project. Malcolm contemplated confronting Rain directly, but Eldrick attempted to dissuade him. With a hint of satisfaction, Eldrick remarked that Rain had already offended the Magic Guild and now stood completely alone. Meanwhile, within Rain's mansion, he worked intently on drafting engineering schematics when Leah entered with news of Malcolm's unexpected arrival. Rain paused, realizing he had never met Malcolm in person before. When Malcolm stepped forward, his demeanor was sharp and demanding. He accused Rain of insulting the Wizards Guild. Rain, genuinely puzzled, asked when such an insult had occurred. Malcolm's irritation grew, and he presented a letter. Rain examined it and questioned how building a dam could be considered an insult to the guild. Malcolm explained the issue. The letter clearly stated that wizard applications were not being accepted for the project. This, according to him, was a direct provocation. Rain was momentarily at a loss for words, wondering if wizards even took on physical labor in the first place. Malcolm pressed him for an explanation, warning that failure to give one would result in the guild ending all cooperation with him. Rain quietly assessed Malcolm's loyalty and confirmed that it remained stable, realizing that Malcolm had been influenced by another party. Maintaining his composure, Rain clarified that the situation was a misunderstanding. He then outlined his reasoning for excluding wizards from the project. First, their mana reserves were limited, and their abilities might not meet the project's strict deadlines. Second, hiring wizards was extremely costly, with the price of one wizard equal to the wages of 10 laborers. Lastly, most wizards enjoyed the safety of the guild, while ordinary civilians had no such protection. Malcolm dismissed these points, arguing that magic ruled the world and those without it were destined to remain beneath wizards. Rain acknowledged the truth in the statement but firmly rejected its acceptance as law. From that moment onward, Rain vowed that everyone in Ashling would come to understand that wizards were no more than civilians. Malcolm's eyes narrowed as he warned Rain to withdraw his words if he wished to avoid becoming the guild's enemy. Rain, unmoved, told Malcolm to watch his tone or risk Leah cutting his throat for his disrespect. Malcolm's confidence wavered, and he demanded to know why Rain held such a stance. Rain answered with certainty, declaring that the rule was absolute and inviting Malcolm to test it if he doubted him. He stated that he could have Leah execute him and let the court determine the outcome. The icy certainty in Rain's tone sent a shiver down Malcolm's spine. His hands trembled as he processed the threat. Eventually, he conceded, offering a reluctant apology. Rain noted that his loyalty still had not changed, confirming that Malcolm remained unaware he was being used as a pawn. Satisfied, Rain signaled Leah to release him. Regaining a measure of composure, Malcolm thanked him before leaving. A notification appeared in Rain's mind. His quest was complete, and he received his reward along with a new mission: to scan 5 individuals with high statistics. For now, he set aside the mission and turned his attention to reviewing his rewards. Outside, Eldrick approached Malcolm, curious about the meeting's outcome. Malcolm, still unsettled, explained that Rain had refused to back down and had even expelled him from the mansion. A calculating glint appeared in Eldrick's eyes. Rather than seeing this as a failure, he began forming a new strategy. One that would ultimately force Rain to hold Malcolm in greater respect. Eldrick outlined his scheme, stating that once the townspeople refused to work for Rain, he would be forced to seek Malcolm's aid. Malcolm questioned why the people would reject such an offer, and Eldrick replied that the answer was simple, for in his view, they were all lazy. Malcolm, however, declined to participate in any act of sabotage, asserting that while he might disagree with Rain's decisions, he would not take part in undermining him. Eldrick, undeterred by Malcolm's refusal, insisted that the people were utterly useless and that their current hardships were a result of their own lack of diligence. He questioned why they would take Rain's project seriously when they had no motivation to work. After some hesitation, Malcolm agreed to test the plan. At the city center, a crowd gathered around the notice board, reading the job announcement. The offer seemed promising, as it included 3 meals a day along with a wage of 10 copper coins. Some individuals appeared interested, yet others remained suspicious, suspecting that there was a hidden agenda. As the discussion continued, skepticism grew, and many began openly rejecting the offer. Lillian stepped forward, chastising the crowd for speaking ill of Rain. She reminded them that Rain had personally assured her he would work to improve the lives of everyone in the city. Her words were met with laughter, and some mocked her by claiming she was defending him only because she harbored feelings for him. Unwilling to be swayed by ridicule, Lillian approached the recruiter and announced that she and her father wished to apply for the project. The recruiter, however, informed her that only her father could be accepted. When she asked for the reason, he explained that she was underage. Rain had specifically ordered that no one under the age of 18 be hired, as he would not tolerate any violations of his instructions. Turning to her father, the recruiter explained the wages and meal arrangements, instructing him to leave a handprint on the document and report to the construction site the next day. On the following morning, Lillian encouraged her father to work hard, and he assured her that he would not disappoint Rain. He reminded her to care for her mother, who was ill and unable to work. The recruiter, overhearing their conversation, asked about the severity of his wife's illness. When he learned that she was gravely sick, he informed him not to worry. Rain had ordered that the family members of any worker employed on the project could temporarily move into the workers' quarters. They could reside there until the completion of the construction and return to their homes afterward. Grateful, Lillian's father expressed his thanks, and the recruiter arranged for someone to guide them to the quarters. As word spread throughout the city, the people began to reconsider their earlier stance. Their doubt gave way to curiosity, and many started registering for the project. The gathering at the registration point grew steadily as more citizens came forward. Meanwhile, Rain reviewed his latest rewards and discovered a blueprint for a lithium iron phosphate battery. Frustration crossed his mind as he considered the lack of an electricity generator to make use of it. Setting that matter aside, he focused on his next objective, which was to find 5 individuals with exceptional abilities. His first thought was to train Leah, yet upon scanning her, he realized that she had already reached her maximum potential. Deciding that he needed to search for other capable individuals within the city, he prepared to set out. Before he could depart, Lillian arrived and requested permission to speak with him, which he allowed. She informed him that workers at the construction site were slacking off. Concerned, he followed her to the location. At the site, Lillian confronted her father, demanding to know why he was neglecting his work. Her father denied the accusation, explaining that he had been working since morning and was simply exhausted. The same complaint came from other workers, all claiming to feel drained and lethargic. Their lack of energy caused them to stop working, prompting Lillian to scold them for their laziness. She insisted that Rain intervene, believing his presence would motivate them. Rain, however, scanned her father and quickly realized something alarming. Turning to Lillian, he explained that they were not merely tired, but were suffering from a curse. Rain activated a recently acquired skill called prospecting, a technique he had originally planned to use only after the construction project reached completion. However, the situation forced him to employ it immediately. The skill allowed him to analyze the composition of rocks and assess the geological conditions of the land in great detail. As the system began its analysis, the results showed no traces of valuable minerals or petroleum. He was about to stop the process when he sensed something unusual. Acting on instinct, he instructed one of the workers to dig deeper. The man obeyed, working with determination until the earth revealed a sinister-looking crystal buried beneath the surface. A wave of unease passed through the group as they wondered whether they had uncovered something that should have remained hidden. Leah, surprised by Rain's ability to detect the crystal, silently questioned whether he was secretly a prodigy in magic. Even with her heightened senses, she had not detected its presence. Rain calmly ordered the crystal to be extracted and placed securely in a box. Turning to Leah, he asked about the usual procedures for handling curses. Leah explained that the afflicted could visit a church to have a priest remove the curse, or they could seek the aid of a high-level wizard. Rain absorbed the information quickly and gave a decisive order to Lillian, instructing her to accompany him and bring her father along. They would visit a priest without delay. Lillian, still struggling to believe what she had heard, asked if her father was truly cursed. Rain assured her that the culprit would not escape justice. Upon arriving at the church, they were warmly greeted by a priestess whose expression lit up at the sight of Rain. He considered the importance of verifying her loyalty before entrusting her with the matter. Using his scanning ability, he discovered that her loyalty stood at an impressive 95. Even more surprising was the revelation that she was not human but an elf. The priestess introduced herself as Aeria and politely inquired about the reason for their visit. Rain explained the situation and allowed Aeria to examine Lillian's father. As she inspected him, her eyes shone with a radiant golden light that caused the man to squint against its brilliance. After a moment, Aeria confirmed Rain's suspicion that Lillian's father was indeed cursed. Rain asked if she could remove it, and Aeria responded by channeling her abilities to dispel the affliction. A wave of relief washed over Lillian's father, and he declared that he felt well enough to return to work. Rain, however, advised him to rest, insisting that they would not resume work until the root of the problem was fully resolved. He then presented the ominous crystal to Aeria for further examination. She studied it closely and identified it as a type of crystal commonly found in the region, although this one contained an unusually high amount of magical energy. She explained that for the curse to take effect, a significant concentration of magic had been condensed inside it. What puzzled her was the nature of the curse itself. With the amount of power stored within the crystal, the caster could have easily killed someone outright. Instead, the curse had only induced fatigue. To Aeria, this seemed more like a petty prank than an attempt to cause serious harm. Rain asked if crafting such a crystal was a difficult task. Aeria replied that for a high-ranking wizard, it would be simple to create one, and just as simple to plant it at the construction site without detection, potentially even on a daily basis. Suspicion stirred within Rain, prompting him to ask how Aeria knew about his construction project. She explained that the church had been aware of it for some time, noting that his work had significantly reduced the strain on their resources. Understanding that he now needed to confront Malcolm, Rain began planning his next steps. Aeria, sensing his thoughts, mentioned that she knew someone who might be able to help him. However, she cautioned that this individual was known to be rather eccentric. Following Aeoria's guidance, they arrived at an impressive mansion, the residence of Lady Selena, the former head of the Wizards Guild. Rain approached the door and knocked, preparing himself to negotiate for her assistance. Before he could say a word, Leah abruptly pulled him backward. A violent explosion erupted in front of them, the shockwave leaving Rain momentarily disoriented. Inside the mansion, a woman let out a frustrated sigh. Selena muttered under her breath about yet another failed experiment. Despite the setback, her determination remained unshaken. She resolved not to give up until her research succeeded, her eyes reflecting the unwavering drive of someone who refused to accept defeat. Selena refused to offer any assistance, claiming that she was currently preoccupied with research on a new magical device. Her tone carried an air of finality, as if she expected no further questioning. However, Rain, curious about her work, asked if she was developing a wand. Selena reacted with visible disdain, scoffing at the suggestion and making it clear that she considered such an idea beneath her intellect. Leah, who had been observing in silence, found the woman's arrogance irritating. She warned Selena to mind her tone, her voice edged with irritation. Selena, entirely unfazed by Leah's words, shifted her attention to her instead. She took a long, appraising look at Leah before remarking on the immense magical power radiating from her. In a tone that was half a compliment and half a command, she proposed that Leah should remain and assist with her experiments, promising that she would help Rain only after her research reached a successful conclusion. Leah, clearly unimpressed, asked if Selena even understood the meaning of basic courtesy. The tension in the room began to mount as the two women locked eyes, their postures growing rigid. It seemed inevitable that the confrontation would escalate into a fight, but Rain stepped between them before it could. He quickly placed a hand on Leah's shoulder, speaking in a low, calm tone that diffused her anger. Once Leah's posture relaxed, Rain turned his focus back to Selena. His gaze drifted toward the table in the room, where an assortment of magical tools and metallic components lay scattered. He asked if she was attempting to craft a magical artifact. Selena answered without much enthusiasm, explaining that the various items on the table were failed prototypes. Her voice carried no shame, only an analytical detachment. She revealed that her goal was to create a device capable of storing the vast reserves of electric magic she wielded. The statement caught Rain off guard. He repeated her words with a hint of disbelief, asking if she truly intended to store electricity. Selena confirmed it without hesitation, adding that each failed attempt ended in an explosion. She waved a dismissive hand, making it clear that their conversation was over and instructing him to leave so she could resume her research. Instead of leaving, Rain took the opportunity to speak with greater confidence. He told her that he knew how to create a device capable of storing electricity. He then posed a direct question, asking if she would be willing to help him if he shared that knowledge. Selena's lips curled into a faint smirk as she dismissed his claim as absurd. However, Rain held his ground, assuring her that he was serious. He asked once again if she would assist him should he succeed in creating such a device. After a brief moment of contemplation, Selena agreed. She promised that if he delivered results, she would not only deal with Malcolm but also ensure that the Wizards Guild acknowledged his authority. There was, however, a clear warning in her voice. If he failed, she would bear no responsibility for what happened to him. Once outside, Rain began to consider where he could find a stable and consistent source of electricity. His mind quickly settled on an interim solution. Until proper power generators could be constructed, human wizards could serve as temporary energy providers. Without delay, he set to work and successfully created a lithium-ion battery. When he presented the battery to Selena, her reaction was immediate. She criticized it sharply, pointing out that it could not store magic and would likely explode if she channeled even a fraction of her power into it. Rain remained calm, countering her claim by assuring her that the battery possessed more than enough capacity. He handed her a wire and instructed her to channel electricity into it. Selena, still skeptical but unable to resist testing the device, took hold of the wire and released a sharp burst of electricity. To her visible surprise, the battery absorbed the energy without a single spark or explosion. Rain's expression turned into a knowing smirk. He asked if that was the full extent of her power, noting that the battery had not even reached half its total capacity. Irritated, Selena increased the flow of magic, pushing far more energy into the device. Minutes passed as she continued, her focus narrowing until her breathing grew heavier. Eventually, she pulled back, clearly frustrated, and questioned whether the battery could truly contain her full strength. Rain, on the other hand, was impressed. By his calculations, the amount of energy stored so far could power an electric vehicle for 3,000 kilometers. Despite that, Selena had managed to charge the battery to 87% in a single attempt. He allowed himself a quiet remark, calling her a convenient battery bank. It was then that he decided to show her the true purpose of his creation. He connected the wires, and the battery produced a steady flow of electricity. Selena's eyes widened slightly in appreciation. She asked if he also possessed the ability to use electric magic. Rain replied with quiet certainty that not only could he wield such magic, but he could also make it possible for everyone in Ashling City to do the same. Selena tilted her head, curiosity evident in her expression. She asked how such a thing could be possible. Rain explained that the device she had just tested was only a fraction of what he was capable of creating. If she agreed to work with him, he would show her a world where magic was not limited to those born with it. In his vision, anyone could wield power, regardless of innate magical ability. For the first time since their meeting began, Selena's guarded demeanor softened. She studied him with a new level of respect, recognizing that his ideas were not mere boasts. Meanwhile, in another part of Ashling City, Malcolm sat comfortably in his office. His expression was one of smug satisfaction as he imagined Rain soon coming to him, desperate and humbled, begging for assistance. His mind lingered on the thought, enjoying the image of Rain's submission. His amusement was short-lived. Without warning, Selena appeared before him, her presence disrupting the calm of his office. Malcolm froze, momentarily startled by the suddenness of her arrival. Confusion replaced his smugness as he demanded an explanation for why she had come. Selena fixed her gaze on Malcolm, her eyes sharp with suspicion. She remarked that he must have considerable nerve to challenge Rain. Malcolm, attempting to appear ignorant, asked what she meant, claiming that such an idea had never crossed his mind. Without hesitation, Selena grabbed his collar and demanded that he speak the truth. She reminded him that her temper was not something to be tested, her voice carrying an unspoken warning. Fear overtook Malcolm, and he quickly agreed to confess. He admitted that he had gathered the mages and convinced them that Rain looked down on them, stirring anger among them. Taking advantage of the situation, he ordered them to create cursed crystals and discreetly place them at Rain's construction site. These crystals drained the energy of the workers, making them appear lazy in hopes that Rain would think they were neglecting their duties. His plan was to force Rain into desperation, eventually driving him to apologize and seek Malcolm's assistance. Once his confession was complete, Selena clicked her tongue in irritation, calling him a fool for not realizing he had been manipulated. Malcolm, confused, stared at her, but she gave no further explanation. Instead, she ordered him to recall the mages immediately. Panicked, Malcolm hurried to carry out her orders. Meanwhile, Selena contacted Rain to report that she had dealt with the Wizard Guild. Rain thanked her, but she casually asked if he wanted her to remove Eldrick from the picture. Rain declined, explaining that he intended to keep Eldrick as bait to draw out the more influential figures working in the shadows. Selena understood his reasoning and, with growing excitement, asked when they would begin the projects he had mentioned earlier. Rain told her to first have the mages charge the batteries. Selena acknowledged the instruction and left to see it done. At the same time, Eldrick met with a masked man to deliver news that Rain had successfully taken control of the Mage Association. The masked man, however, showed no concern, claiming there was nothing to fear except Selena. In his eyes, no one else in the association posed a significant threat. What troubled him most was Rain's mysterious project. He warned that if the project succeeded as Rain predicted, it could transform Ashwin City in ways that could not be allowed. Eldrick reassured him, explaining that he already had a plan in motion. He had been secretly persuading the nobles to raise grain prices, thereby tightening control over the city's food supply. The masked man narrowed his eyes and asked if Eldrick was certain the nobles would support him. Eldrick smiled, confident that Rain had taken their wealth and left them resentful. By offering them an opportunity to regain what they had lost, he could secure their loyalty. Although he recognized that they might betray him in the future, he was certain they would never act against their own profits. He added that Rain lacked the funds to keep his project running for long. Meanwhile, at the marketplace, a merchant kicked Lillian aside and ordered her to leave. Angered, she demanded to know why grain prices had risen so sharply. The merchant, unmoved, shrugged and reminded her that the supply was his to sell at whatever price he wished. Lillian remembered her promise to obtain the grain for Rain at the lowest possible cost. She glared at the merchant and warned him that Rain would not tolerate such exploitation. The merchant smirked and claimed that they were simply businessmen taking advantage of an opportunity. To further insult her, he stepped on her and told her to get lost. Elsewhere, at the church, Aria was equally troubled. In only 3 days, the cost of grain had tripled, causing concern throughout the community. She turned to Ilaria with a grave expression, explaining that their current supplies would not be enough to last through the winter. She instructed Ilaria to secure what they had and return it to the church, assuring her that she would find a solution for the rest. Aria handed her a bag of money. Ilaria hesitated, surprised by the large amount, and remarked that it was far more than necessary, since bribing the guards usually required only a third of that sum. Aria insisted that she follow her orders without question. Reluctantly, Ilaria agreed. Before she could act, however, the bag of money was snatched from her hands. Shocked, she turned to see Leah holding it with a sly grin. At that moment, Rain stepped forward, asking Ilaria if she would be interested in making a deal. Aria narrowed her eyes, demanding to know the reason Rain had sought her out. Rain, maintaining a calm expression, advised her to relax while speaking with him. Her irritation deepened, and she scoffed at his remark, dismissing it as nonsense and insisting that elves would never be found in this city. Rain informed her that he was fully aware of their true identities and assured her that he bore no hostility toward them. Aria studied him for a long moment before asking what he wanted. Without hesitation, Rain explained that he required food supplies. She informed him that such a request might be beyond his reach. When Rain questioned her, Aria elaborated that the food supply in Ashling City was controlled by 4 noble families who had maintained their influence over the city for more than a century. While he may have intimidated a few people at the recent banquet, she noted that those were merely insignificant players in the greater scheme. Curious, Reign asked if she was familiar with the city. Aeria nodded and revealed that she had lived in Ashling City for 120 years. She then pointed out that if he had not acted against the Eldren family during the banquet, negotiations might have been possible. Due to the ongoing war, food was already in short supply, and the shortage was particularly severe this year. If grain prices had remained steady, her people could have survived the winter without fear of starvation. Reign listened carefully to her concerns and then, with confidence, promised that within half a month the price of grain would drop significantly. Meanwhile, at the Klein family mansion, Augustus, the head of the household, sat at the head of an opulent table surrounded by his business partners. He declared that, thanks to Eldrick, the four great families had accumulated immense wealth. The gathered nobles raised their glasses in celebration, each expressing their gratitude to Eldrick for the role he had played in their success. As their celebration continued, a butler entered and informed Augustus that Reign had invited him to a banquet. A sudden hush fell over the room. One noble voiced concern, wondering aloud if Reign intended to target them next. He admitted that while his aim had been to profit from the situation, he had no desire to risk his life in the process. Augustus, however, remained composed and reassured the man. He reminded everyone present that Eldrick had assured them their actions were entirely legal. Furthermore, he explained that as long as the four noble families stood united, Reign would be powerless to oppose them. With a confident smirk, Augustus declared that they alone controlled the grain prices, and no one, not even the Duke's son, could interfere. The nobles exchanged glances and eventually agreed. They believed that if they acted decisively now, their families would remain wealthy for the next 100 years. Despite their confidence, Augustus cautioned them. If Reign applied too much pressure, they would lower the grain prices by only 5 copper coins, enough to ease public discontent without affecting their profits significantly. However, he warned that if any one of them attempted to abandon their alliance, he would personally ensure that they paid the price. The nobles nodded, reaffirming their unity. With their resolve renewed, Augustus announced that it was time to attend the banquet. Back at Reign's mansion, the butler entered the grand hall and respectfully informed his master of Augustus's arrival. Seated at the head of the long dining table, Reign instructed him to allow the guests entry and to begin serving the meal. As Augustus and the other nobles stepped inside, they greeted Reign with faint courtesy. Reign observed them carefully and remarked that they still had much to learn. His gaze lingered on their attire, and he questioned why they appeared so impoverished despite holding complete control over the seized grain market. Augustus replied smoothly that they had recently learned about his industrial project and wished to contribute to it. Another noble quickly followed, claiming they had already donated significant funds and had sold their grain at the lowest possible prices. Leah, unable to remain silent, spoke with open contempt, accusing them of being shameless for attempting to deceive Reign. However, Reign did not respond with anger. Instead, he smiled, as though impressed by their apparent generosity, and thanked them for their supposed assistance. Maintaining a calm demeanor, he then revealed the true reason he had invited them. He wished to discuss business concerning grain. Augustus, believing he had anticipated Reign's intentions, assumed that Reign was running low on funds. He stated preemptively that 2 gold coins per sack was already a loss for them. The other nobles supported this statement with expressions of feigned sympathy, hoping to maintain the upper hand. However, Reign corrected them immediately. They had misunderstood entirely. To their surprise, Reign explained that he was not asking them to lower grain prices. On the contrary, he was asking them to raise them. He proposed that the price of grain should be increased to 4 gold coins per sack. The nobles stared at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend his reasoning. Before they could recover from their shock, Reign continued speaking with the same casual tone. He added that from this increase, he would be taking 30% of the commissions for himself. Augustus confirmed with Reign whether the order to raise the price to 4 gold coins per bag had truly come from him. Reign reminded him that such a decision would guarantee Augustus a 30% commission from the transaction. Augustus smirked, remarking that he had once thought Reign to be nothing more than a privileged noble youth. However, he now recognized that Reign was just as shrewd as any experienced merchant. With Reign showing such cooperation, Augustus believed that their path forward would be far smoother. He admitted that had he known Reign to be so reasonable, he would have approached him much earlier. Nevertheless, Augustus acknowledged that without an official decree, the price could not be legally altered. He thanked Rain and asked when the announcement should be made, revealing that the prepared document, already bearing the family seal, was ready for posting. Rain instructed that it be displayed after their meal. Augustus assured him that no one would dare to defy his orders, for all were aware of the consequences. Upon returning to the Klein family mansion, Augustus was approached by several associates who questioned whether Eldrick should be informed of the situation, as the circumstances seemed unusually suspicious. Enraged by the suggestion, Augustus smashed his wine glass, warning that the more people became aware of this arrangement, the less profit they would gain. He declared that Rain lacked substantial power and was merely using them to secure his own benefits. The matter, he insisted, must remain confined to their circle alone. This was, in his eyes, a golden chance to amass an enormous fortune. One of the men admitted that he had never before been granted such a lucrative opportunity and that his earlier hesitation had been nothing more than a fleeting concern. From that point onward, he pledged to follow Augustus without question. Augustus laughed with satisfaction, declaring that they would now stand united. He ordered his men to act quickly, acquiring grain from the smaller merchants before the price rose any higher. This time, he promised, they would achieve profits beyond anything they had imagined. Meanwhile, at Irene's mansion, Ioria's fury was palpable. She condemned Rain as a traitor, demanding to know why he had broken his promise to lower the grain price. She accused him of colluding with corrupt merchants and warned him that the elves were not to be underestimated. Lillian attempted to calm her, assuring her that Rain had sworn to bring the price down. Aeria, however, refused to believe it, claiming that his alliance with dishonest traders betrayed his true intentions. Lillian urged her to trust him, confident that Rain had a strategy in place. Still unconvinced, Aeria turned directly to Rain and demanded to know whether he truly intended to raise the price. Rain, maintaining his composure, told her not to be concerned, assuring her that the inflated price would not last long and that within half a month the market would collapse. Aeria scoffed at his words, calling him naive and claiming that he had no understanding of the cruelty of the world. In her 2 centuries of life, she declared, she had never seen a market drop after a price hike. Rain remained unfazed. He asked her how much she believed the price would have fallen if he had simply threatened the merchants. Would it have been reduced by a single copper coin, or perhaps 10? Aeria argued that even such a reduction would have been better than raising the price from 2 gold coins to 4, as at least some families could have barely scraped together enough to buy a single bag. With the price doubled, she insisted, famine would be inevitable. Rain countered that even at 2 gold coins per bag, many would have starved regardless. For the common folk of Ashland City, the difference between 2 gold coins and 4 was meaningless, they would perish either way. Aeria glared at him in anger, but Rain continued, clarifying that he did not aim for the merchants to lower the price by a small margin. His true intention was to ruin them entirely. 7 days later, Rain was occupied with teaching Selena the basics of battery construction. He carefully explained every detail of how a battery functioned, ensuring she grasped both the theory and practical application. Selena listened with keen interest, fascinated by his depth of knowledge. When the lesson ended, Leah entered the room to inform him that Aeria had returned. Irritated, Rain wondered aloud if she had nothing better to occupy her time. Selena interjected, explaining that Ioria's anger had only grown, as grain prices had soared due to his deliberate manipulation. The cost had now reached 7 gold coins per bag. Moments later, Aeria stormed into the room, furious, declaring that even minor nobles were now unable to afford grain. She demanded to know whether Rain was aware of the current cost. Rain, calm as ever, asked Leah how many days had passed since the price increase. Leah promptly replied that 7 days had gone by. Rain then announced that the time had come to bring those corrupt merchants to their downfall. Aeria, exasperated, demanded that he stop speaking in riddles and explain himself directly. Rain revealed that he had not told her his full plan earlier to avoid arousing suspicion among the nobility. Now that the time was right, he was willing to share the truth. He began by stating the current price of a bag of grain, 4 gold coins, and then posed a question to Aeria. What was Ashland City truly lacking? Aeria considered for a moment before answering that nothing was missing. Rain corrected her with a faint smile. What the city truly lacked, he explained, were merchants willing to sell grain. At that moment, realization struck Aeria, leaving her stunned. Rain asked Aeria if she understood his reasoning. In Ashling City, the scarcity extended beyond food to the willingness of merchants to sell it. Greed was an irresistible force, and no merchant could resist its lure. The price of grain had risen to 4 gold coins per bag, creating a frenzy among those eager to profit. Reign explained that when merchants from neighboring towns learned of this price surge, they would rush into the city with their stock, eager to exploit the opportunity. The four noble families, blinded by their desire for gain, would purchase heavily from them, further inflating the supply within the city. In time, Ashling City would possess the largest grain stockpile in the empire. Yet, Reign knew that merchants driven by visions of enormous profit often lost all sense of judgment. Once the trap was sprung, the four noble families would cease to hold any power. Reign instructed Leah to post a public notice stating that Aeria, in direct opposition to his policies, had chosen to sell the church's reserve grain at the price of 1 gold coin per bag. Leah was to ensure that the announcement spread widely. Aeria was startled and questioned why he had decided to give her such a favorable reputation. Reign replied that he himself had no grain to sell. She objected, pointing out that she had only a limited supply and could not afford to deplete her reserves. Her people needed that grain to survive the coming winter. Selena dismissed Aeoria's protest, claiming that immediate sales were the only sensible choice. Delays would only bring greater loss. Aeoria responded that elves had no interest in coins, only in ensuring enough provisions for their survival. Reign, unmoved, ordered her to follow his plan, assuring her that her grain supply would only grow. He then tasked Selena and the Magic Association with sealing off the city to prevent anyone from leaving. Selena assured him she would see to it personally. Reign instructed everyone to proceed with their roles. Seeing Leah's hesitation, he asked if something troubled her. She admitted concern that the merchants might wait out the plan, allowing Aeoria's grain to run out before prices shifted. Reign explained that there were two kinds of strategies. A hidden plot could be uncovered and thwarted. An open strategy, however, could not be avoided. The greed of the merchants would drive them to compete for quick profit, but when the price began to drop, panic would set in. In such a contest, hesitation meant ruin. At the Klein family mansion, one of the men urgently informed Augustus that the church had announced sales of grain at 1 gold coin per bag. Alarm spread among them, as they realized the church had been entirely overlooked in their calculations. In confusion, one asked what they should do next. Another attempted to remain calm, reasoning that the church could not possibly hold a large reserve. Augustus quickly ordered them to send buyers to the church at once and acquire as much grain as possible. The church courtyard soon filled with a restless crowd, each person desperate to secure food. Aeria tried to calm them, urging patience and promising there was enough for all. The crowd refused to listen, shoving and pressing forward. She ordered them to form a line, but the chaos persisted. Then a man, accompanied by guards, stepped forward and ordered the crowd to halt. He announced that the grain was sent by the Pope himself and that this was only the first delivery. More would come the following day. Aeria acknowledged his words, then turned to Reign with irritation, accusing him of making her position difficult. She demanded to know what explanation she should give to the Pope. The news of further supplies delighted the common folk, who celebrated at the thought of plentiful grain. The merchants, however, grew grim, sensing their fortunes crumbling. One merchant, calculating his costs, realized the danger. He had bought grain for 60 silver coins per bag, with expenses raising his total to 95 silver. Selling immediately would yield a small profit, but any delay would bring heavy losses. Accepting the inevitable, he began selling his grain. The moment the crowd saw his lower price, they surged toward him. Other merchants, seeing his decision, recognized the risk of holding their goods any longer. They too began selling at lower prices in a frantic attempt to recover part of their investment. The marketplace descended into a frenzy of trade, with prices falling by the hour. Leah, observing the scene, was astonished at how perfectly Reign's prediction was unfolding. Reign remarked that it was simply human nature. Merchants feared losses more than they desired profit, and once panic began, it spread without restraint. Leah estimated that prices would soon drop to 50 silver coins per bag, making the plan a complete success. Reign corrected her with a confident smile. The real collapse, he explained, would come when Augustus himself began selling. At that point, grain would become the cheapest commodity in Ashling City. Aeoria questioned Reign, asking if he truly believed that Augustus and his subordinates would recklessly sell their grain to outsiders. She reminded him that they received at least 2 gold coins or more per bag and that their unity as a group meant they would not betray each other so easily. Reign countered that she was giving them far too much credit. When profit was involved, no one would hold back. He added that the price of grain would soon cease to be an issue and suggested they leave to discuss the second part of their deal. Meanwhile, at Augustus's estate, the butler rushed in to report urgent news. Out-of-town merchants had begun slashing grain prices, causing the market rate to plummet to 75 silver coins per bag. One of Augustus's men scoffed, dismissing the claim as impossible. They controlled the grain supply, so he demanded to know how outsiders could obtain such quantities. The butler firmly maintained that his report was accurate. Augustus fell into silent thought before the truth struck him. Realization twisted into rage as he accused Reign of plotting to ruin their families. Alarmed, his subordinates pressed him for details. Augustus explained the scheme. Reign had deliberately spread word that grain prices were rising, drawing merchants from nearby towns. Once they arrived, he had used the church's name to drive prices downward, creating panic and forcing merchants to sell at a loss. The nobles could hardly believe they had been deceived so thoroughly. However, Augustus quickly regained composure and announced that he had a counterplan. His men, intrigued, urged him to explain. He stated that the current grain reserves would only last a few months. If they withheld sales until desperation set in, they could demand exorbitant prices later. The key was to remain steadfast and refuse to sell now. If even one person broke the agreement, the plan would collapse entirely. Roland, though clearly nervous, voiced agreement and stated that he would return home to stockpile his grain. In truth, he had already decided to sell to cut his losses. The other nobles noticed his sudden departure and understood instantly that their unity was broken. One by one, they left with the same intent, each determined to act in self-interest. The butler stepped forward, vowing to personally ensure that none of their men would sell. Augustus's temper flared, and he kicked the butler aside. He declared that if they refused to sell, the other three nobles certainly would. Without further delay, he ordered the immediate sale of all their grain. Back at Reign's mansion, he turned to Aora and asked if the current stockpile was sufficient for her people. She frowned in confusion, remarking that the more they sold, the more they seemed to gain in return. Reign explained that they were selling at the highest point and purchasing at the lowest, ensuring maximum profit. At that moment, Lillian entered with another report. Prices had fallen further. 1 gold coin could now purchase 3 bags of grain. Reign looked back to Aora, pointing out that his earlier words had been proven correct. If she bought them now, she would gain 10 more bags. With the grain matter settled, Reign shifted the conversation, asking if they could now discuss their agreement. Aora eyed him warily, asking what kind of arrangement he intended with her elf tribe. His answer was bold: he wanted everything. She was taken aback, seeking clarification. Reign elaborated that his side could provide for every aspect of her tribe's daily needs and that he was willing to negotiate any requirement they had. Aeria, who had been silently observing, grew uneasy. She admitted that the decision did not rest with her and that she would need to speak directly with her queen. Reign nodded and asked her to arrange a meeting. At his request, Aeria summoned Ilaria and instructed her to deliver a letter to their queen. Reign watched her leave, reflecting on the situation. With the grain crisis resolved, the nobles would be powerless to cause trouble for some time. The Magic Association was already under his influence, and it was only a matter of time before he took control of the church as well. At present, Eldric's only remaining strengths were his control over the military and the tax system. If Reign could wrest control of the military, Eldric would be completely at his mercy. The challenge lay in finding a way to infiltrate the army's ranks. His thoughts were interrupted when Leah entered, teasing that he should take more time to relax. She offered to help him unwind, but he dismissed the idea, stating that he was not tired. Before the conversation could continue, raised voices from outside drew his attention. Reign stepped out to see a man arguing heatedly with Aeria about soldiers. The man's frustration was clear as he complained that while he could tolerate some losses within Ashling City, being robbed by soldiers on his journey home was unacceptable. He demanded to know how he was supposed to proceed now. Reign approached, and the man turned to him, demanding to know who he was. With a faint smirk, Reign replied that he was someone interested in doing business with him. At the border gate, a guard stopped Lillian and demanded to inspect her carriage. She maintained her composure as she stated that she was a citizen of Aora City, transporting goods purchased in the city, and that she was traveling to the elf tribe for business purposes. The guard remained unmoved by her explanation and gave the order for his men to search the cart. Without hesitation, the soldiers began rifling through her belongings, showing no regard for their condition. Boxes were overturned, fabrics were torn, and containers were upended, spilling their contents across the ground. Lillian tried to intervene, but her voice was ignored, and her attempts to shield her goods were brushed aside. When the soldiers finally completed their inspection, they reported to their superior that no suspicious items had been found. Despite this report, the officer insisted that she must pay the toll according to the rules. Lillian's patience thinned as she demanded to know why she should be forced to pay after they had already destroyed the very goods she had worked to acquire. The officer's expression hardened, and his tone grew sharper as he gave her a simple choice. She could pay the toll or she could turn around and leave. Before she could offer another protest, a voice from within the carriage urged her to comply. Suppressing her frustration, she reluctantly retrieved the payment. However, the guard's smirk deepened as he informed her that the toll had been increased to 5 silver coins under Rain's direct orders. The word struck her with disbelief. The value of her remaining goods was barely worth 3 silver coins, yet they were demanding far more. She accused them of absurdity, but the guard's demeanor remained indifferent as he repeated that she could leave if she refused to pay. Realizing that open defiance would lead to further complications, she took a deep breath, calmed herself, and handed over the required amount. Inwardly, she consoled herself with the thought that Rain would deal with this matter soon. Once the payment was collected, the guards waved them through. Inside the carriage, Rain sat in silence, muttering curses at himself in quiet self-reproach. A merchant seated beside him frowned at the self-directed criticism and advised him to be careful with his words, reminding him that he was considered the savior of Ashling City. The merchant's eyes lingered on him with curiosity, finding his attitude strange. The merchant had noticed the contradiction. The guards had claimed that Rain himself had ordered the toll increase, yet here he was directing his anger toward the guards rather than defending their actions. The merchant suspected that Rain was unfamiliar with the specific details of the city's current administration. Deciding to share his perspective, the merchant recounted his own experiences, explaining that although he had personally suffered financial losses from shifting market prices, he had never before encountered a lord who genuinely cared for his people. If given the chance, he would willingly serve under Rain's rule. Rain continued muttering to himself, his words touching on the deaths he had caused during the banquet. The merchant understood immediately what he referred to and dismissed the guilt as unnecessary, stating that the Eldren family deserved their downfall. Rain asked if the merchant truly knew them. The merchant nodded and explained that anyone conducting business in Ashling City was well aware of the Eldren family's reputation. While public opinion suggested that their fortune came from casino operations, the truth was far darker. Their primary source of income was human trafficking. Rain froze for a moment before his expression hardened. Already burdened by the lack of manpower, he seethed at the revelation that the Eldrens had been exploiting the very workforce he needed to strengthen the city. He immediately began considering his next moves. The first priority would be to secure control over the border guards. Without stability, Ashling City would be vulnerable, and the surrounding nations would not hesitate to take advantage of any internal disorder. His thoughts were interrupted by raised voices outside the carriage. Lillian, her patience nearly exhausted, was confronting a soldier about yet another toll. Her tone was sharp as she questioned why they were being charged again so soon after passing the gate. The soldier replied that the toll for Ashling City was separate from the toll at the border fort, suggesting that different rules applied in each location. Lillian accused him of lying, but the soldier merely shrugged and repeated the same ultimatum she had heard before. She could pay or she could leave. Grinding her teeth, she demanded to know the amount. The soldier's reply was delivered with smug satisfaction. The toll this time was 1 gold coin. Her eyes widened at the outrageous demand, and she declared it blatant robbery. Before her anger could escalate further, Rain's voice came from inside the carriage, instructing her to pay. Though resentment burned within her, she knew there was no choice but to comply. She retrieved the coin and handed it over, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. As the soldier pocketed the payment, his gaze shifted toward the carriage. He had noticed movement within and his suspicion grew. Declaring that this was a border fort where all travelers must be inspected, he demanded that every passenger disembark. Without hesitation, Rain pushed open the door and stepped down onto the dirt road. His movements were calm, and his gaze was steady as he invited the soldiers to carry out their inspection if they deemed it necessary. The lead soldier took a step forward, ready to speak, but the moment his eyes fully registered Rain's face, he froze in place. His expression stiffened, and the color drained from his features. Recognition had struck like a sudden blow. Rain and Lillian stepped down from the cart. Rain's eyes locked sharply on the guard, his expression firm as he told him to proceed with the inspection if that was truly their intention. The guard froze, his face draining of color as sweat gathered along his temples. he stammered, asking why they had come here. The soldier's attention shifted to the merchant standing behind Rain. A sneer formed on his face as he called the merchant an immortal old fool and questioned how he dared to return. Rain turned slightly toward him, asking if he happened to know the merchant. The merchant's expression grew uneasy as he explained that these men were once bandits in the mountains nearby. After forming an alliance with the Eldren family, they were assigned to kidnapping and trafficking people. The Eldren family had brought them into this city. The soldier sneered again, saying that the merchant had failed to pay enough tolls the last time he left the city, and as a result, the soldier had been scolded. Unless the merchant paid the difference today, he should abandon any thought of leaving. Without warning, the soldier struck the merchant across the face. The old man did not retaliate, though his eyes burned with anger. Stepping back, he shouted that he had paid the full amount last time, without a single coin missing. The soldier pointed his weapon at him, declaring that paying once did not excuse him from owing more now. According to the soldier, if the merchant had not been traveling in this carriage, they might have overlooked it for a couple of gold coins. Now that they recognized him, they would not let him leave without paying 5 gold coins. Rain interjected, stating that something seemed inconsistent. With tolls this high, the city's financial income should not be so low. The soldier glared at Rain and demanded to know where he came from. His eyes shifted to Leah, who stood silently beside Rain. A smirk spread across the soldier's face as he commented on her beauty and the fact that such a woman resided in Ashling. The merchant quickly pulled out a pouch of coins, saying that if they wanted 5 gold coins, he would pay. He only asked that they avoid making trouble for his business partners. The soldier took the pouch with a satisfied grin and tossed it to another soldier for safekeeping. Then he reached out toward Leah, addressing her with feigned endearment and asking where she was from. Before his hand could touch her, Rain stepped between them. He remarked that he had been wondering if the soldier could be useful as free labor, but it was now clear there was no hope for him. Enraged, the soldier thrust his spear at Rain. Before the strike could land, Leah moved, killing the man with swift precision. The remaining soldiers recoiled in fear. Rain's tone was cold as he ordered Leah to kill anyone who resisted. Afterward, their own guards would take control of this post. The soldiers panicked, throwing down their weapons and running while shouting for help. They claimed that someone was murdering people at the border. Their escape was short-lived. Leah moved with blinding speed, cutting down several of them before they could get far. Rain glanced at the system panel before him, noting with mild surprise that the soldiers' stats were abysmally low. His mind drifted briefly to his father's warning before his departure, reminding him that beyond Ashling lay the territory of the enemy kingdom. He had been advised to avoid provoking any conflict between their nations. Now, with this discovery, Rain felt fortunate to have uncovered such a significant problem before it escalated. If matters with the Empire turned hostile, the ultimate loss would be his alone. Leah approached the last of the soldiers, dagger in hand, but before she could act, a commanding voice cut through the air, demanding to know who dared to cause trouble at Ashling's border. The soldiers' expressions shifted instantly, relief flooding their faces as they called out that General Caesar had arrived. They pleaded for his help, declaring that they were saved. General Caesar stepped forward, his gaze landing on Rain. He frowned and asked if Rain was the one responsible for the commotion. Rain quickly assessed him using his abilities. All of Caesar's attributes were above 70, but his loyalty registered at only 12. Without the problem of loyalty, Caesar could have been a valuable asset. Rain addressed him directly, referring to him as the general of the Holker family and mentioning that his brother worked in Priscilla's territory. Caesar paused, taken aback, and demanded to know who Rain was and how he had such information. Rain answered calmly, stating that Priscilla Edgar was his sister. Caesar's expression shifted to shock as he realized that Rain was the youngest son of Duke Aldarian Edgar. The soldiers nearby turned pale, realizing the weight of their mistake. Memories stirred in Caesar's mind of a letter his brother had sent, informing him that young Lord Rain would soon arrive in Ashling. However, a month earlier, Eldrick had bribed Caesar with a chest of gold, claiming that Ashling's future depended on his cooperation. Others had encouraged him as well, suggesting that the Duke had assigned him to this remote outpost because he did not value him. They had flattered him, telling him his talents deserved better recognition. Caesar had convinced himself that this was only what he was entitled to, believing he should not waste his life in such an insignificant place. Now, even faced with the truth and the clear danger, Caesar felt no remorse for his actions. He drew his sword and commanded his soldiers to kill the man he called an impostor, promising them generous rewards for doing so. Leah's temper flared upon hearing Caesar's intentions, demanding to know whether he truly planned to rebel against the empire. The soldiers nearby shifted uneasily, urging Caesar not to act recklessly, warning that such an offense would result in the execution of their entire families. Caesar, however, stood firm, insisting that their course of action was justified. He reminded them that they had already blackmailed the son of a Grand Duke and broken imperial law themselves. Sensing hesitation among the soldiers, Caesar invoked the memory of Rein's actions in Island City, the complete destruction of the Eldren family and the financial ruin of 4 major noble houses. He declared that this was the westernmost region of the Collateral Empire, and if they gathered the wealth they had stolen over the years and presented Rein Edgar's head to the Orvis Empire, they could secure lives as minor nobles there. Raising his sword toward Rein, Caesar coldly stated that the choice to live or die was theirs, and he would not force their decision. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, weighing the risks and rewards. Gradually, Caesar's words took hold, and Leah's alarm grew as she realized they were beginning to believe him. Within moments, they aligned themselves with Caesar, turning their weapons on Rein. Caesar's expression brightened with malicious satisfaction as he taunted Rein, asking if he had any final words before death. Rein, unshaken, declared that Caesar still had a chance to repent and be spared. The lack of remorse in Caesar's eyes left Rein disappointed. Before he could say more, Caesar ordered the soldiers to attack. The armed men rushed forward. Leah, driven by fury, tore the hem of her dress for greater mobility and charged into the fray. She felled one soldier with a single strike, then spun gracefully to avoid a spear aimed at her face, countering with a swift dagger thrust that ended her opponent's advance. Noticing another soldier rushing toward Rein, Leah acted instantly. Trusting her skills, Rein did not move. Before the attacker could close the distance, Leah's thrown dagger struck true, dropping the man to the ground. Rein turned his gaze on Caesar, warning him sternly that this was his final chance to end the madness. Caesar ignored the warning and raised the stakes, offering a reward of 1,000 gold coins to whoever killed Rein. The promise spurred the soldiers into a frenzied charge. One broke off from the group to target Leah, believing her elimination would ensure Rein's downfall. She dispatched him with a sharp kick and continued to dismantle her opponents with precise, calculated movements. A spinning kick sent several sprawling, groaning in pain. Recognizing her skill, Caesar ordered the unit's mage to intervene. The mage swiftly formed an energy orb, releasing 3 ice arrows toward Leah. She shattered them with a rapid series of kicks, yet the fragments froze the ground beneath her, locking her feet in place. Caesar shouted triumphantly, urging his soldiers to seize the chance to kill Rein. The group split in 2, half moving toward Leah while the others closed in on Rein. Rein acted quickly, tossing a hammer to Leah and telling her to jump. In his other hand, he held a wire connected to an electrical device. Leah smashed the ice around her legs with the hammer and leapt into the air. The frozen ground below became the perfect conductor for his plan. As the wire touched it, a surge of electricity raced outward, striking the advancing soldiers. Cries of pain filled the air as they collapsed, unconscious. Standing safely on ceramic shards to insulate himself, Rein allowed a satisfied smile to form. The few remaining soldiers froze in terror, uncertain of what they had witnessed. Some whispered questions about whether this was lightning magic. Rein amused himself with the thought that, had he a camera, this would have been the perfect safety training demonstration on electricity for his workers. Caesar's fear twisted into anger, and he barked another order for the remaining soldiers to attack. One hesitated, warning that Rein was using forbidden magic and that approaching him meant certain death. Caesar silenced him permanently with a swift killing blow, accusing him of undermining morale. He then glared at the rest, shouting that Rein was just one man and could not kill them all. The soldiers, though trembling, did not move immediately. Leah's concern deepened, wondering why Rein's device was no longer affecting the enemy. He realized the battery had run dry. This had been only a single-use test. Leah urged him to retreat while there was still time, but Rein calmly stated there was no need, declaring that Caesar's charade would end that day. Believing Rein's magic exhausted, Caesar ordered his men to give chase. Before they could take a step, a pillar of light descended from above, bathing the battlefield in an overwhelming glow. The soldiers froze, their courage dissolving into fear. Caesar looked upward, his expression betraying uncertainty. From the sky, Selena appeared, her presence commanding the attention of everyone on the field. Caesar's eyes widened, struggling to comprehend why a member of the Mage Association had arrived at such a critical moment, and why she had chosen to intervene on Rein's behalf. Selena arrived at the battlefield with precise timing. Reign acknowledged her presence, noting that her arrival was perfect since the battery powering his device had just been depleted. The remark caught Selena's interest, as she had not expected him to depend on such technology. She expressed her curiosity about its effectiveness. Reign assured her that once Caesar and his men were captured, he would explain the matter in full. Accepting his statement, Selena turned toward the assembled mages and ordered them to assist Lord Reign in eliminating the rebels. The mages responded by casting intermediate lightning magic, sending bolts crashing down from the sky. Thunderous strikes illuminated the field, causing rebels to cry out in pain, plead for mercy, and swear to abandon their defiance. Caesar, consumed by hatred, resolved to kill Reign even at the cost of his own life. He pushed forward through the chaos, evading attacks from the mages and closing the distance. Leaping high, he unleashed his Ice Mountain sword technique in a final desperate strike. Reign remained still, exuding confidence. At the moment Caesar's attack descended, Leah stepped forward. Armed only with a dagger, she blocked the powerful blow with ease. The impact shattered the ground beneath her feet, yet she stood unmoved. Caesar felt a wave of dread as he realized he had underestimated her speed and strength. Leah countered swiftly, delivering a powerful kick that sent him crashing into a wooden fence. He fell unconscious, and Leah regarded him coldly, dismissing him as unworthy. An hour later, Caesar awoke to find Reign seated before him, calmly reviewing confiscated documents. The dim glow of an oil lamp cast shadows across Reign's face, accentuating the sharpness of his expression. Reign addressed Caesar directly, mentioning his long history of embezzlement as a border official and questioning when he had begun collaborating with Eldren. Shocked, Caesar stammered, asking how Reign had learned of the connection. Reign revealed that he had anticipated Eldren's betrayal for some time, simply waiting for an opportunity to act. Caesar had provided that opportunity. Caesar scoffed at the notion that evidence of corruption could bring down Lord Eldren. Reign clarified that the records were not for blackmail but for calculating Ashling's annual trade tax revenue. This data would form the foundation for his plans to rebuild the city. Caesar mocked the idea, claiming that Eldren's control over the nobility made such ambitions impossible. Reign countered with a cold remark, stating that the living may be called nobles, but the dead are called corpses. The weight of his words unsettled Caesar, who began to grasp the extent of Reign's resolve. Reign stated that the nobles had two options. They could follow Caesar down the path to death, or they could submit to his authority and serve diligently. He left Caesar to contemplate what choice the nobles would make. Later, Reign examined the deteriorating city wall. Autumn was approaching, and Grand Duke Edgar would inevitably mobilize his forces. If war came, the current walls would not withstand an assault. To the west lay the Elven territory of the Saints, where peaceful negotiations could prevent conflict. The eastern front was held by his second sister, posing no threat. The greatest danger came from the northern lands of Grand Duke Sorin. Leah approached, carrying a stack of papers. She reported that the embezzled funds amounted to 350,000 gold coins. Reign instructed her to place the guards in charge of local defenses, distribute 100 gold coins to each soldier, and send the remaining funds back to Ashling. He then noticed Selena preparing to depart for the city. Reign expressed his gratitude for the Mage Association's aid. Selena acknowledged the thanks, though she pressed him for an explanation of the battery's function, particularly how he used it without magic. Reign assured her that she would receive a full explanation in time. During the return journey, Selena urged Reign into the carriage so they could travel quickly. Before they could depart, Malcolm arrived in haste, his expression marked by urgency. Selena questioned him, and he revealed that Lord Eldren had seized control of Ashling. The revelation shocked Selena, but Reign's response was a calm smile. He remarked that Eldren had finally made his move. Selena pressed for details, concerned about suppressing the rebellion since all Mage Association forces were away from the city, leaving it without magical reinforcement. Reign reassured her, explaining that Eldren's defeat was inevitable from the moment he chose betrayal. After learning of the coup in Ashling, Reign led his soldiers and members of the Mage Association back toward the city. The tightly locked gates stood before them as Reign advanced with measured steps. His voice carried unwavering confidence as he called out to Eldren, questioning whether he had finally been driven into a corner. Eldren appeared atop the city walls, his demeanor calm and without concern for Reign's arrival. He responded with a mocking tone, asking the purpose of the young master's return to Ashling. Reign disregarded the sarcasm and instead sought to know why Eldren had dared to betray his father. The inquiry struck a nerve. Eldric's voice rose in fury as he declared that it was because Rain's father had abandoned him in this desolate place. Years earlier, Eldric and Rain's father had faced countless dangers together in building the empire. However, upon becoming Grand Duke, Rain's father had failed to grant Eldric his due rewards, instead sending his family into exile in this barren region. Eldric had sent repeated letters requesting transfer to a more prosperous territory, but each plea had been coldly rejected. Eldric insisted that Rain's father bore full responsibility for such injustice. Behind Eldric, a group of hardened figures emerged. They had once been loyal comrades of Rain's father, risking their lives for the empire, yet they too had been forgotten and denied proper recognition. Eldric proclaimed that they were not rebels but rightful claimants to what had been unjustly withheld. Rain regarded the reasoning with disdain, remarking that he had expected at least a noble justification, yet this was merely another petty contest for power. He offered them a choice. Those who wished to live could leave the city and surrender immediately. Those who refused would face the breaking of the walls within 3 days. His cold tone drew laughter from the nobles above. They mocked his threat, doubting his ability to breach such fortified defenses without suffering heavy losses. Eldric joined their derision, claiming that Rain was nothing more than a fool driven to delusion by fear. With deliberate mockery, he proposed a wager. If Rain breached Ashling within 3 days, Eldric would surrender himself without resistance and allow Rain to decide his fate. When asked what would occur if the attempt failed, Eldric replied that Rain would instead surrender to him. Selena, standing nearby, urged Rain to disregard Eldric's taunts. She argued that they could take their time, as Leah had already informed them that the rebellion had been reported to the Grand Duke and reinforcements were on the way. There was no need to gamble recklessly. Yet Eldric continued his provocations, calling Rain cowardly and questioning his courage. Rain's expression shifted to a faint smile as he accepted the wager, stating that he hoped Eldric would keep his word. He then departed, leaving Eldric to reaffirm his promise before those assembled. Eldric added that the army of the Orvis Empire had been informed of the rebellion and would arrive at the border within 10 days. He warned Rain not to allow himself to be captured alive when that moment came. Rain ordered his troops to establish a camp outside the city. Inside the command tent, tension was high. Selena spoke of the worn city walls, noting that even in their current state, breaching them within 3 days was nearly impossible with their limited numbers. She urged him to reconsider. A commander suggested retreating south to await the Grand Duke's army before making any assault. Rain studied the map in silence before assuring them that Ashling would fall within 3 days. His greater concern lay with the approaching Orvis army. He turned to Leah, inquiring about her progress with gathering firewood and hay. Leah confirmed that everything was prepared and that they had located a nearby lake as instructed. Rain ordered Selena to have the mages freeze the lake water with ice magic, lowering its temperature to near freezing. Selena questioned whether such a method could truly breach the walls, but Rain maintained his confidence. The next morning, as sunlight touched the horizon, Rain led his forces toward the city gates. Soldiers carried dry firewood and hay to the base of the walls. From above, Eldric ordered his men to fire arrows, yet the attackers advanced behind sturdy barriers, rendering the assault ineffective. Confusion spread among Eldric's ranks. He could not fathom why Rain would bring firewood instead of siege weapons. Once the supplies were in place, Rain's soldiers retreated swiftly. A nearby soldier speculated that the intent might be to set the walls aflame. Eldric struck him across the face, demanding whether he understood that stone could not burn. The soldier, clutching his cheek, admitted he could think of no other explanation. A sudden shout from another soldier broke the exchange. Flames had begun spreading along the base of the walls. Eldric looked down to see the fire rapidly growing. For a moment, he was speechless, then dismissed the tactic as foolishness. He mocked the idea of burning stone and refused to order the mages to intervene, reserving their magic for moments he considered truly critical. Arrows were not to be wasted either. Eldric declared with cold certainty that in 3 days, Rain's arrogance would be crushed upon those very walls. For 2 consecutive days, Rain's army burned the city walls of Ashling without pause. The intense heat from the flames had turned the once cold fortress into a scorching barrier. Eldric, however, felt certain of his victory. Convinced that the attacks were futile, he returned to his mansion to celebrate with the nobles. As the hours passed, his confidence only grew. The celebration was interrupted when a subordinate rushed in, breathless and pale. He reported that Rain's forces had stopped burning the walls. Eldric rose from his seat, his composure unchanged. A deep laugh escaped him as he declared that the enemy must have exhausted their entire winter stockpile of fuel. In his mind, Reign was already on the verge of kneeling in surrender. He ordered the nobles to accompany him to witness Reign's defeat. The nobles agreed readily. They knew this was the final day of the wager between Reign and Eldrick. After 2 days of relentless burning, the walls had become so hot that even approaching them was dangerous. To the defenders, victory seemed inevitable. Atop the walls of Ashling, Eldrick stood with his arms folded, looking down upon Reign's army with a mocking expression. He taunted Reign, questioning whether the flames had finally been extinguished in preparation for surrender. Reign raised his head, his expression grim, and addressed Eldrick and the nobles. He warned that this was their last chance to surrender, or they would die where they stood. Eldrick showed no fear. Instead, his excitement grew, and he reminded Reign of the wager they had made. If Reign failed to breach the walls before sundown, he would be forced to admit defeat. Eldrick pressed him, asking if he intended to break his word in front of all the assembled warriors. The nobles joined in, urging Reign not to retreat from the terms of the agreement. Reign closed his eyes briefly, drew in a slow breath, and murmured a cold remark that they should not blame him for what came next. He raised his hand and gave the order to Selena. Without hesitation, Selena appeared in the air above the battlefield. She was the most powerful mage under Reign's command, and her magic distorted the space around her. The sound of roaring thunder echoed across the field, and fierce lightning formed at her command. The sky darkened, and the wind howled through the ranks of soldiers. With her strength gathered, Selena unleashed a colossal bolt of lightning, striking with the force of a raging beast. Eldrick immediately commanded his mages to erect a defensive barrier. From all sides, his magic users emerged, chanting in unison to form a radiant shield that enveloped Eldrick and the nobles. The lightning did not aim for Eldrick or his men. Instead, it struck the city wall below them. For a moment, confusion spread among the defenders. Eldrick himself was caught off guard, though he quickly regained his mocking tone, dismissing the attack as pointless. Before his laughter could fade, the sky grew darker still. Massive black clouds churned above, and the wind grew stronger. Then came a torrential downpour. As the rain fell, Reign's soldiers advanced once more. They no longer carried weapons, but instead buckets brimming with ice-cold water. Selena's breathing grew heavy from the strain of her magic, and she began to falter. Reign caught her before she could fall, speaking words of genuine gratitude for her efforts. He admitted that her ability to change the weather was beyond anything he had imagined. Selena, still worried, asked if he truly believed the plan would work. Reign assured her with quiet confidence that the fortress would not withstand what was coming. Leah, watching from nearby, cried out in alarm as the soldiers reached the base of the walls. The flames that had burned so fiercely for days were quickly smothered by the relentless rain in the buckets of freezing water. Steam erupted in thick clouds as the cold water met the scorching stone. Hissing filled the air, and soon, small cracks began to appear along the fortress wall. The fractures spread rapidly, deepening into jagged fissures. A sharp cracking sound echoed repeatedly, signaling the wall's impending failure. Eldrick's face drained of color as he muttered in disbelief, questioning how this was possible without immense magic. The nobles beside him were equally shaken, whispering that such destruction should have been impossible. A deafening explosion suddenly shattered the air. A massive section of the wall broke apart, collapsing into rubble. Eldrick, the nobles, and the soldiers standing atop it had no time to escape. They plunged into the debris below, their screams drowned out by the roar of falling stone. The spectacle froze even Reign's troops for a brief moment. The fall of Ashling's impenetrable fortress had been swift and devastating. Reign wasted no time. He commanded his army to advance, capture those who surrendered, and cut down any who resisted. His soldiers surged forward, now armed with gleaming steel instead of buckets. The destruction of the wall shattered the defenders' morale. Many dropped their weapons and fled, while others surrendered outright. Victory was now within Reign's grasp. Selena stared at the ruins in astonishment, unable to believe that the fortress had truly fallen. She wondered how Reign had managed such destruction, certain that even her full magical strength could not have matched it. Reign approached her with a calm smile and told her that the battle was over. They could now return. Among the rubble, Eldrick clawed his way free. His humiliation burned as fiercely as his anger. He swore to himself that he had underestimated Reign, but the fight was not yet over. If he could survive until the arrival of the Empire's northern army, he might still have a chance. Before he could rise to his feet, a shadow fell across him. 3 nobles stood over him, their eyes cold and unyielding. One asked slowly where he intended to go, his tone laced with disdain. Another smirked, his expression dark, stating that they were not ready to die yet, and Eldrick would have to endure what was coming on their behalf. After breaching the city walls and annihilating the rebel forces, Rain led his army into the city under the thunderous cheers of its people. Citizens called his name with fervent admiration, praising the astonishing victory. Many marveled at how the fortified walls, said to be impenetrable, had fallen within only 3 days under his command. Even more remarkable was the fact that apart from a few soldiers spraining their ankles while carrying supplies, his forces suffered no casualties. Selena, unable to contain her curiosity, approached Rain in flight, asking how he managed to destroy the city walls so easily. Noticing her persistence, Rain inwardly sighed, realizing she would not leave until he answered. He decided to give a simple explanation, describing the principle of thermal expansion. However, the moment she heard the term, Selena's expression turned blank, clearly not understanding. Rain continued patiently, explaining how materials expand when heated and contract when cooled due to changes in the vibration of their particles. Selena remained dazed, struggling to grasp the concept. Observing her confusion, Rain chuckled and promised to explain further after they dealt with Eldrick. Soon, Rain and his army reached the collapsed section of the wall. There, a faint voice called for Rain's help. He frowned at the sight of a disheveled nobleman lying on the ground, remarking coldly that the man was attempting to earn pity. The nobleman flinched, and another quickly spoke, claiming they had been deceived by Eldrick, which led them to betray Rain. A third added that they had planned to capture Eldrick to redeem themselves but had been tricked. Rain reminded them that they had been given 2 chances to change their course and had squandered them. Realizing his resolve, the noblemen trembled, dropping to their knees and offering their wealth in exchange for their lives. Rain laughed, pointing out that killing them would make their wealth his anyway. One nobleman protested that such an action would destroy loyalty among followers. Rain replied that loyalty is tied only to self-interest and called them foolish for not understanding such a truth after living so long. He ordered his soldiers to capture them for later judgment. Meanwhile, in Eldrick's mansion, the traitor urged a masked man to help him escape, explaining that Rain had broken through the walls. The masked man expressed disbelief that such fortifications could fall so easily. Eldrick explained nervously that Rain had heated the walls for days before dousing them with cold water, causing them to collapse. The masked man, suspecting powerful magic, clenched his fists in anger. Eldrick, panicked, begged for escape as Rain approached. The masked man began casting a teleportation spell using a scroll, but before it could be completed, a calm voice questioned where they intended to go. Rain entered, noting mockingly that Eldrick's retreat from the walls had allowed his army's swift advance. Turning to the masked man, Rain taunted him, questioning whether the mask hid scars or ugliness. The masked man, provoked, warned Rain that the imperial army of Orvis was approaching and would reclaim the city. Attempting to escape, the masked man unfurled his scroll, but Rain ordered Leah to stop him. Leah's thrown dagger missed the head but shattered the mask, interrupting the spell. The man glared with fury as Leah moved to Rain's side. Recognizing his face, Leah's eyes widened slightly. The man stared at her with hatred before completing his spell and vanishing with Eldrick, vowing to return. Leah apologized for failing to stop them, but Rain remained calm, expecting they would have prepared an escape. What troubled him was the masked man's identity. Leah revealed that he was Ravenclaw Eldren, once a trusted subordinate of the Grand Duke who had defected during the war to serve Grand Duke Sorin of the enemy. Rain, frowning, noted that Ravenclaw shared the Eldwen surname and asked if he was related to Eldren, the executed traitor. Leah confirmed Ravenclaw was the true head of the family but had left due to disagreements with his father's ideals. Selena soon arrived, reporting that while the city was under control, the Orvis Imperial army was approaching. She warned that the damaged walls could not be repaired in time, even with the Mage Association's help. Rain, confident, assured her that he already had a solution. Later, he summoned the populace to the town square. Selena assumed he would reassure them, but she was unsure of his exact plan. Standing on a raised platform, Rain addressed the crowd through a sound amplification device, announcing that the Orvis army would arrive within days. A hush fell before panic erupted, screams filling the air as fear spread through the citizens. Selena, shocked, turned to Rain with outrage, questioning his intentions. Rain frowned in confusion, questioning why Selena insisted the truth should remain hidden. Selena explained that news of an enemy invasion would instinctively drive the people to depend on the military. Since they were not trained soldiers, remaining calm during such a crisis would be nearly impossible. Rain listened, yet believed her reasoning was flawed. In his mind, composure on the battlefield was the responsibility of the commanders, while soldiers needed only the will to fight. Selena could not understand why he would think this way. Without elaborating further, Rain retrieved a scroll and faced the gathering below. Holding a voice-amplifying device, he announced that the letter came from the Orvis Empire. The message branded the people of Ashling as cowards and fools, unworthy of defending their homeland, urging him to abandon them. The crowd fell into silence, yet fury soon erupted. They denounced the Orvis Empire as thieves who had stolen their grain each year, vowing that this time they would stand and fight. Seeing their anger, Rain pressed on, stating that the Empire clearly misunderstood them. The crowd roared in unison, proclaiming they would fight to the death, whether 1 against 1 or 2 against 1. Rain declared that if they truly possessed such courage, he would lead them to drive the enemy from their land. The square thundered with cheers, and the fighting spirit of the people reached its peak. As night fell, the lights in Rain's office remained lit. He studied the city's defensive map with meticulous care. Leah entered, offering tea and urging him to rest. Rain smiled in gratitude but stressed that no time could be wasted. They needed a solution before the enemy reached the border, or Ashling would fall. Leah hesitated, recalling his confident speech earlier, and wondered why he now seemed troubled. Rain placed the cup on the table and admitted that his earlier words had been a calculated lie to steady the people. If chaos spread, even an orderly evacuation would be impossible, as fear made people unpredictable. Leah's concern deepened, and she urged him to flee the city for his safety. Rain appreciated her concern yet refused. He had already ordered Malcolm and Selena to lead the vulnerable to safety, but surrender was not yet an option. His eyes drifted toward a notebook labeled Blue-Black Magic Oil. Uncertain of its nature, he handed it to Leah for identification. Leah recalled it as a flammable liquid used in certain witch rituals. This brought petroleum to Rain's mind, a substance found in various colors depending on resin and asphalt content. Recognizing its potential, he instructed Leah to take him to see the stored black-green magic oil. They arrived at the city lord's warehouse, where Rain ordered servants to locate the barrels containing the substance and warned them to keep it away from fire. Inside the warehouse, gold ingots and years of stolen taxes from Orvis lay piled, amassed through Eldric's corruption. Rain thought of how such wealth could complete his industrial plans once the crisis ended. Before long, the servants brought several large barrels. Rain rushed forward, and upon opening one, confirmed that it was indeed the substance he hoped for. His mind raced with possibilities, knowing this discovery could solve his current problems. Far from Ashling, the scene shifted to the Orvis Empire's military camp, where Count Castile sat within his tent. Eldric and Ravenclaw stood before him, their faces tense. Ravenclaw admitted failure in their mission, prompting Castile's fury. He condemned them for losing an entire city in 3 days. Eldric defended himself, claiming Rain had used a forbidden spell to destroy the city walls, without which they could have held out until the army arrived. This explanation surprised Castile, who assumed Rain's father had sent a powerful mage to aid him. Ravenclaw assured him that a practitioner of forbidden magic could not use such spells repeatedly in a short span. Since Ashling had already been damaged beyond repair, now was the ideal time to attack. Castile dismissed their advice, ordering them to return to Orvis and await further news. Ravenclaw grew suspicious, questioning why he was being sent away from a plan they had devised together. Castile, holding a scroll, declared that Ravenclaw was no longer part of the strategy. He tossed the scroll to him. As Ravenclaw read, his anger mounted. The letter claimed the war stemmed from his personal hatred, which had brought suffering and bloodshed. Castile declared his wish for peace, ordering Ravenclaw's capture and surrender as atonement to end the conflict. Ravenclaw roared in rage, but Castile's expression hardened. Soldiers seized Ravenclaw despite his resistance. Eldric, witnessing this, trembled with fear, regretting not fleeing sooner. Castile turned to him with a cold gaze, asking how he should be dealt with. Eldric fell to his knees, claiming he held a secret that could elevate Castile's power in the Empire. Castile's interest was immediately stirred. In the Lord's mansion in the city of Thurland, within a grand chamber, Priscilla, elder sister of Rain and ruler of the territory, sat immersed in a document. Her thoughts lingered on her younger brother, wondering how he was faring in his domain. If her schedule allowed, she intended to visit him. Her moment of reflection was interrupted when Gwen entered and announced that a letter had arrived from Rain, delivered by Leah. Priscilla's expression softened with warmth as she accepted the letter, but as her eyes moved across the page, her features hardened. The warmth gave way to fury. Without hesitation, she ordered Gwen to summon Velas Holker immediately. Gwen departed swiftly, returning shortly with Velas, who knelt before her in confusion and apprehension. Priscilla's gaze was sharp and cold as she accused the Holker family of treason. The word struck Velas like a blow. His complexion turned pale as he denied the charge, insisting that his family had no reason to betray her. He reminded her that, with her support, his family had recently secured an important trade route and swore they had no intent to commit such a crime. Priscilla was unmoved. She threw the letter at him, declaring it proof of his family's disloyalty. Velas retrieved the letter with trembling hands, reading its contents. The document revealed that Lord Eldrick had allied with Grand Duke Castile of the Orvis Empire, conspiring with several nobles from Ashling, including General Caesar Holker of the Border Army. The letter stated that Caesar Holker had been captured and executed through Rain's efforts, but urged vigilance toward other members of House Holker. Priscilla's expression grew darker as she demanded to know if Velas had any last words before his death. Velas, paralyzed by fear, claimed the betrayal was solely the act of Caesar and not the will of House Holker. He begged her to investigate before passing judgment, swearing on his life that his family had no part in the treachery. Priscilla studied him closely, reading his every expression and gesture. She concluded that his words held truth and considered that Caesar may have acted alone. Velas, still on his knees, pleaded for a chance to prove his loyalty. Priscilla asked how he intended to do so. Velas proposed sending his daughter Rosalind to lead troops in support of Rain against the Orvis Empire's army, offering this as proof of House Holker's allegiance. Priscilla weighed the risk. Rosalind was young, recently of age, and had not completed her training at the Knight Academy. If she fell in battle, the family would lose its heir. Velas, however, remained resolute, insisting that House Holker owed all its fortunes to her patronage and that without her support they would have fallen into ruin. Priscilla eventually agreed to his request but instructed Gwen in private to secretly monitor Rosalind. If she displayed the slightest hint of betrayal, she was to be executed without hesitation. Far from Thurland, Eldrick and Grand Duke Castile stood on a cliff overlooking Ashling. Castile confirmed with satisfaction that this was their target. Eldrick observed the city walls, noting their improved condition. He remarked on the addition of a trench, clearly a measure arranged by Rain to strengthen defenses. Castile laughed, mocking Rain for expending the mana of his mages on fortifications. Eldrick questioned whether such measures would not complicate their assault. Castile dismissed the concern, pointing out that Ashling was surrounded by open plains with only a small river nearby. He argued that the terrain would not hinder their forces and that the city's mages had likely drained much of their mana on the repairs, leaving them weakened. Eldrick praised Castile's reasoning, and the Grand Duke's confidence swelled. A knight stepped forward to suggest surrounding the fortress and cutting off its supplies rather than launching a direct assault. Castile perceived this as a challenge to his abilities and reacted with irritation. The knight hastened to clarify that he sought only to avoid needless losses, not to question the Grand Duke's strength. He explained that a siege could be a more measured approach. Castile dismissed the idea, declaring that casualties were inevitable in war. He viewed the largely inexperienced recruits in his army as needing the trial of direct combat. He ordered a mage to accompany him to Ashling, confident that his presence would intimidate Rain into surrender. Within his office, Rain faced the challenge of training 5 individuals with exceptional attributes. Half a month had passed with little progress, as he had found no time to search for suitable candidates. Leah entered, reporting that Grand Duke Castile and a mage had arrived outside the city, requesting a meeting. Rain soon appeared atop the city walls, where soldiers bowed in respect, their expressions tinged with worry. In the sky above, Castile began to address him, but Rain's voice cut through with mocking disdain. He questioned whether this figure before him was truly the Grand Duke, drawing laughter from the soldiers. Leah confirmed his identity with a calm nod. Fury twisted Castile's expression. His voice shook as he accused Rain of insolence that even his father would not have dared. Rain remained composed, asking the Grand Duke to state his business in West Death. Castile roared that he was granting Rain a final opportunity to beg for forgiveness. If Rain surrendered, the city would be spared a massacre. Rain's smirk deepened, his eyes cold. He declared that Castile had one final chance of his own. If he valued his life, he should withdraw his forces and return to his territory immediately. Rain's command for Castile to retreat ignited the Grand Duke's fury. Castile regarded Reign Edgar as a man oblivious to his place. From his elevated position, the Grand Duke pointed at Reign and proclaimed that he had brought an army of 100,000 to the city. He warned that if Reign wished to avoid death, he should surrender at once. Reign, however, found the threat unremarkable and unworthy of concern. He turned to Leah and instructed her to deal with the arrogant intruder. Leah acknowledged the order with composure. Lifting her dress slightly, she revealed small daggers secured to her legs, selected one without hesitation, and hurled it toward Castile. The mage at Castile's side reacted in panic, rushing forward to raise a protective barrier. His magic failed to withstand the weapon's force, and the blade tore through the shield, grazing Castile's face. The Grand Duke's humiliation was instant and severe. He had come to demonstrate power, yet the encounter left him mocked and wounded. His eyes blazed with hatred toward Reign, who stood calm upon the city wall. Reign stated with steady authority that this was a warning, and should such an event occur again, Leah's aim would not falter. Castile seethed with rage yet could do nothing. He withdrew with his retinue, disappearing into the distance. Reign's smirk faded as his demeanor turned serious. He ordered Selena to prepare for battle, certain the Orvis Empire's army would attack soon. Returning to his command post, Castile met the concerned gazes of his knights as they noticed his injury. He dismissed their worry, calling it a petty strike from Reign. He then ordered the assault on the city to commence without delay, intent on capturing Reign and inflicting personal vengeance. One knight stepped forward to advise caution, noting that the army had marched for 3 days without rest and needed recovery before deploying siege engines. Castile's anger erupted. He struck the knight across the head, demanding to know if such a march had truly weakened the soldiers of the Orvis Empire. The knight urged him to think strategically, explaining that the troops required time to construct a bridge across the river and ready their equipment, or risk severe disadvantage. Many soldiers agreed with the reasoning, yet Castile refused to yield. He declared that their enemy would expect them to rest, and by attacking immediately they would catch them unprepared. His voice silenced further protest, and preparations began at once. In the Imperial camp, the soldiers had only just finished pitching their tents and were finally able to rest. Their exhaustion was heavy after 3 continuous days of marching. Complaints spread quietly among them. One soldier muttered that his body felt close to collapse, while another lamented the hardships of serving in the army. A brief distraction arose when a soldier mentioned seeing a sheep slaughtered, sparking hope for a proper meal that night. The prospect lifted spirits momentarily. This hope was crushed when a commander appeared, announcing that all troops must assemble for an immediate assault on the city. One soldier voiced concern, suggesting they eat first after such a long march. The commander sympathized but made it clear that orders could not be disobeyed. The troops readied themselves with heavy hearts, their strength already waning. Soon, the Orvis forces approached Ashling, raising a dense cloud of dust as they moved. The clash of marching feet and shouted orders echoed across the field. A wide river separated them from the city walls, forming a natural barrier. From atop the walls, Reign studied the enemy's movements. A soldier approached and asked when to begin firing arrows. Reign, observing the struggle of the troops at the riverbank, delayed his answer. He asked if anyone present had fought the Orvis Empire before. A soldier stepped forward, confirming his past experience. Reign gestured toward the enemy, noting their apparent weakness and lack of nourishment, and asked whether this was a common trait or something unusual. The soldier examined the scene and concluded that the troops were likely new recruits and starving. Reign questioned how an army could allow its men to fall into such a state before battle. Another soldier hesitated before offering a second theory. At Reign's insistence, he explained that Castile might be using these men as expendable forces to exhaust the defenders' resources. Reign's expression darkened at the thought. He asked whether the soldiers of the Orvis Empire were not also citizens worthy of protection. The reply came with quiet resignation, stating that leaders who valued their people, such as Reign and Duke Edgar, were rare. Most, like Castile, sacrificed their men without remorse. Reign fell silent, considering the cruelty of the strategy. If Castile viewed his soldiers as disposable, he could expect no mercy in return. The soldier then reminded Reign that with their arrow reserves, they could easily eliminate the starving troops and asked when to begin. Reign's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes glinting coldly. He ordered that there was no need to fire, leaving those around him startled. The battle's course was taking an unexpected turn. Due to a shortage of boats, the new recruits of the Orvis army were forced to swim across the river while still clad in heavy armor. Exhausted from hunger and the strain of crossing, many collapsed upon reaching the shore, barely able to remain upright, let alone prepare for combat. Rein and Selena, observing from the city walls, were momentarily surprised by the sight. Rein quickly recovered and ordered Selena to direct the mages to employ wind and ice magic. Trusting his strategy, Selena complied. She rose into the air with controlled grace, drawing the attention of the struggling recruits below, and released the extreme frost seal spell. A powerful wind swept across the battlefield, carrying a biting frost that covered the surroundings of Ashling. The temperature plummeted, and the already soaked soldiers began to shiver violently. Their movements grew sluggish as the cold gnawed at their strength. From within the Orvis military camp, Grand Duke Castile observed the scene and unexpectedly laughed. A knight at his side, puzzled, asked the reason. Castile replied with a confident air, explaining that he had deliberately sent the recruits first to deplete the city's arrows. To his surprise, Rein had not taken the bait, instead choosing to exhaust his mages' mana on inexperienced troops. Castile declared that once the mages were drained, his elite cavalry and battle-hardened mages would strike decisively. The soldiers around Castile praised him as a master strategist, and his arrogance grew. He imagined Rein captured, kneeling before him in defeat. Yet on the field, no blood had been spilled. The Orvis recruits, already fatigued, grew fearful when they saw the mages upon the walls, viewing them as forces capable of annihilating entire units. Fear spread rapidly. Some recruits fled outright, others dropped to their knees, pleading for mercy. Many lamented that they did not wish to die before knowing the comforts of life they had yet to experience. Confusion set in when they realized no offensive spells were being cast, only the relentless cold. Their commanding officer, enraged, ordered them back into the fight. They obeyed reluctantly, their bodies trembling with each movement. Selena landed beside Rein after completing the spell, uncertainty in her gaze. She suggested reinforcing the attack with thunder mages. Rein declined, stating that since ancient times, hunger and cold had been more effective in breaking a soldier's will than weapons or destructive magic. His judgment proved accurate as the chill deepened. The recruits could barely stand, their teeth chattering as voices of despair rose among them. Some shouted that they were freezing to death. Others threw down their weapons and stripped away their armor in a futile attempt to retain warmth. The commanding officer roared at them to fight, but they pleaded that their hands were too numb to hold a blade. Hunger gnawed at them, and many feared death more from the elements than from the enemy. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the officer sent a messenger to Castile while forcing the rest to continue the assault. In his tent, Castile sat comfortably over a lavish feast of roasted lamb, fine wine, and other delicacies. The contrast between his comfort and the soldiers' suffering outside could not have been greater. A soldier entered with a report, but before he could speak, another burst in, wounded, fatigued, and visibly enraged at the sight of the banquet. Suppressing his anger, the injured man reported that Rein had used frost magic to cripple the recruits and that they could no longer fight. He requested a retreat. Castile feigned outrage, calling the soldiers weak and unworthy of the Orvis name. Another soldier protested that they were not afraid of death but too starved and frozen to continue. Castile remained unmoved and ordered the man's execution. Inwardly pleased that his initial wave had been spent, Castile decided it was time for him to lead the assault personally. An officer advised against the risk, but Castile insisted, stating that the army must witness his greatness. He ordered the main forces forward, including mages and cavalry, and commanded the earth mages to construct bridges across the river. The mages complied, raising solid earthen structures that connected both banks. Once the final bridge was set, Castile commanded the attack and promised great rewards to whoever captured Rein. Thousands of cavalrymen surged forward, their charge shaking the ground. From the city walls, Rein watched the advance with calm precision. A knight reported that the Orvis Empire had committed to a full-scale assault. Rein gave a sharp nod and instructed Leah to execute the prepared strategy, ensuring that the trenches outside the city were filled and all escape routes sealed. Leah obeyed immediately, and soldiers poured oil into the trenches, letting it spread unseen across the water. The Orvis army remained unaware that the true battle had only just begun. The battle for Ashling raged as another force raced toward the city. A cavalry unit led by Rosalind Holker advanced at full speed. Riding her trusted steed, Rosalind's expression was set with determination. She was resolved to reach Ashling and keep Lord Rein from danger. Before her departure, her father had reminded her repeatedly that the survival of their family depended on this mission. Rosalind had vowed she would see it through. A knight rode up beside her, his tone filled with concern. He urged her to rest, pointing out they had marched for 3 days without pause. She might endure, but the soldiers could not. Without slowing her pace, Rosalind asked about the remaining distance to Ashling. The knight reported they were a day's ride away. Rosalind ordered the mage beside her to project a map. The mage obeyed, conjuring a glowing map that displayed their exact position. Rosalind studied the map and concluded the border fortress of Ashling had likely fallen to the Orvis Empire, with Lord Rain now making his stand inside the city. A realization struck her, and she abruptly reined in her horse. She called for Nox, the shadow mage, to reveal himself and discuss strategy. The air in front of her distorted, and a pitch-black rift opened. From it, Nox emerged. The knights reacted instinctively, raising weapons. The captain ordered a protective formation around Rosalind and demanded the stranger's identity. Rosalind intervened calmly, addressing the dark mage by name. Nox regarded her with a cold stare before asking what she wanted. She explained her plan to cut the Orvis Empire's supply lines and launch a surprise rear attack. She acknowledged his orders from Lady Priscilla to monitor her but insisted she needed his help. Nox stated his orders were to eliminate her only if she endangered Lord Rain, with no requirement to assist her. Rosalind countered that they both sought Lord Rain's safety, so helping her would not violate his orders. Nox considered her words, then agreed to listen. Rosalind laid out her strategy. She would lead her troops around Ashling and strike the enemy rear. Nox was to use his magic to seal the upper stream of the moat, then release the water on signal to flood the battlefield and drown the Orvis soldiers. Far from the battlefield, the elf saint Aeria returned to her homeland, carrying an important letter from Rain. In it, Rain proposed an alliance with the elf tribe, offering resources to improve their lives and ensure survival. After reading it, the elf queen asked for counsel. An elder warned that humans were deceitful and unreliable, urging avoidance. Another advisor acknowledged the risk but pointed out their dependence on human trade for winter survival. The queen turned to Aeria, the only one who had met Rain. Aeria hesitated, then described Rain as despicable and cunning, quickly amending it to intelligence. She explained how following his advice had secured abundant winter supplies and saved money. A surprised elf remarked on the rarity of such a human. A blonde-haired elf remained skeptical, noting that scouts had seen Rain engaged in battle days earlier. She remarked on the futility of human wars and stated that any trade depended on Rain's survival. The queen agreed that if Rain died, plans would be meaningless, and declared she would go to the battlefield herself to observe. Back at Ashling, Orvis soldiers attacked relentlessly. Defenders atop the walls loosed arrows to prevent them from climbing. Amid the chaos, Rain stood on an observation tower, his gaze fixed on the battle below. Selena, beside him, voiced concern about taking action. Rain replied there was no need to rush. The plan would begin only once Grand Duke Castile entered the fray. Castile could not be allowed to escape. Selena tried to hide her anxiety but noticed Orvis soldiers scaling the walls. Castile, seeing his troops breach defenses, ordered an all-out charge. War cries echoed across the battlefield. Rain's eyes narrowed as Castile stepped onto the earth bridges, crossing into the city. Rain turned to Selena and gave the order to act. On the walls, defenders rushed to intercept climbers. The captain moved in front of Rain, commanding that his safety take priority. Rain ignored the fighting on the defenses and instructed Selena to cast a fireball into the black waters of the moat. Selena acted without hesitation. She lifted her hands, her gaze fixed on the dark still waters of the moat, and gathered blazing mana in her palms. The fireball formed instantly under her focused will, followed by a storm of flaming spheres arcing across the battlefield toward the moat. Grand Duke Castile quickly noticed the sudden magical barrage and ordered his troops to prepare. He believed this was a desperate final strike and commanded his mages to block the attack. The Orvis Empire's mages stepped forward and raised a shimmering barrier. Fireballs struck it with explosive force, scattering ash and embers. Selena pressed the attack without pause, the barrier straining under the relentless impact. Some fireballs broke through and crashed into the waters below. A knight rushed to Castile's side, reporting that the mages were exhausting their mana reserves. He warned of the danger if the defenders had another plan. Castile dismissed the warning with a mocking smile, declaring that the defenders had already spent their strength. He treated the fireballs in the moat as harmless and inaccurate. Knights around him praised his tactical brilliance, claiming his victory would be remembered across the empire. Castile accepted their admiration with satisfaction, certain that Rain's resistance was nothing but a futile gesture. The ground suddenly trembled. The fireballs in the moat did not extinguish. Instead, the waters ignited into a towering wall of fire, sealing the Orvis army's retreat. Castile's expression shifted from pride to fear as the flames spread, cutting off escape and trapping his forces inside the city. Panic consumed the Orvis ranks. Soldiers screamed in horror, some consumed by the fire where they stood. Castile demanded to know how such a thing was possible, unable to understand why the water burned with such ferocity. He recognized the destructive force as rivaling forbidden magic. Castile froze, realizing his entire army was trapped. Trembling, he looked to the city walls and saw Reign standing tall, watching the battlefield with cold detachment. A chilling thought entered his mind, marking Reign not as a man but as a monster who would burn 100,000 soldiers alive without hesitation. A knight rushed to Castile's side, urging immediate retreat. Castile ordered a withdrawal and told his mages to extinguish the flames. The mages, pale and drained, admitted they had no mana left after maintaining the barrier. Despair settled over Castile as he understood his defeat was certain. From above, Selena observed the battlefield. The Inferno's power equaled that of a forbidden spell, yet the true horror lay in the fact that Reign had achieved it without magic, using only barrels of oil and precise planning. Reign remained on the wall, unaffected by the screams below. The destruction disturbed him as a man, but he accepted it as a necessity of war. If such a tragedy was to be avoided in the future, the city's industrial growth had to advance rapidly. He turned away from the scene and placed command in Selena's hands. Selena ordered the mages to launch an all-out magical assault. The sky filled with streaks of light as bolts rained down on the trapped soldiers. The Orvis army was nearly destroyed. Far from the flames, Castile survived only because a loyal knight dragged him to safety, shielding him from the fire. His body was burned, his spirit shattered. He staggered back to his camp, finding it silent and deserted. Confused, he scanned the area until something massive fell from the sky, striking the ground with a crash. It was a giant sword, embedded in the earth before him. A figure appeared beside it, and Castile's face turned pale. The woman's eyes locked on him. She stated that his clothing marked him as a noble of the Orvis Empire and that she had searched for him for a long time. Castile, trembling, asked what she wanted. The woman approached, a leather whip in her hand. This was Rosalind Holker, and her voice carried restrained fury. She demanded to know the location of his main army and whether Lord Reign was alive. Before he could react, the whip struck his side, forcing a cry of pain from his lips. He begged for mercy and promised to talk. In desperation, he claimed that Reign had burned his army with forbidden magic. He shouted his name, declaring himself Grand Duke Castile, and demanded that she release him. Rosalind stared down at him, unconvinced. The tale sounded absurd, like an attempt to mislead her. Without further words, she ordered her soldiers to seize Castile and continue the interrogation until the truth was revealed. After taking control of the Orvis Empire's military camp, Rosalind decided to remain there. Her goal was to force Grand Duke Castile to reveal the location of the main enemy force. She stood over a large map, her expression tense, when a soldier entered the command tent. Rosalind immediately asked about Castile's condition. The soldier hesitated before reporting that Castile remained obstinately silent on useful details. He continued to claim he was indeed Grand Duke Castile and insisted that his entire force of 100,000 men had been destroyed by Reign, who, according to him, unleashed a forbidden fire spell at the border fortress of Ashling. Rosalind's face turned cold. She struck the table with her fist, the sound echoing through the tent. She ordered the soldier to continue the torture until Castile stopped lying. She then instructed the army to rest until dusk. At nightfall, they would move to assault the fortress and rescue Reign. Intelligence indicated that during the previous enemy offensive, the Orvis forces had constructed several temporary earth bridges across the moat. These had been abandoned but remained intact. Rosalind intended to use them to enable her cavalry to cross quickly. She knew the fortress could not be taken directly, so she planned to lure the remaining enemy forces into the open and coordinate with the mages sent by Priscilla. Timing and precision would be critical. She briefly considered bypassing the fortress entirely and advancing straight to Ashling. Before she could decide, a loud disturbance erupted from the forest nearby. Without hesitation, she called for weapons and declared the camp under attack. Soldiers surrounded her in a defensive formation. Some shouted toward the forest, demanding the hidden attackers reveal themselves. From the trees, a group emerged slowly, showing no aggression. As they stepped into the open, their features became clear. They were elves, including the Holy Maiden Era, several elders, and the Elven Queen herself. Rosalind stared at them, her shock masked by a controlled tone. She stated that their presence could only mean the elves had sided with the Orvis Empire and conspired against Reign. A blonde-haired elf stepped forward, declaring that such an accusation was false. She claimed Reign had requested a meeting with their queen to discuss trade and asked how Rosalind could accuse them of treachery. Rosalind dismissed the statement as a fabrication. The blonde elf's anger flared, and she ordered her archers to ready their bows. Rosalind responded by commanding the Knight Battalion to prepare for incoming fire. The tension between the two sides was at its peak when the Elven Queen stepped forward and raised her hand. A magical barrier appeared between them, halting any exchange of arrows. The Queen spoke with calm authority, stating that their arrival was diplomatic, not hostile. She explained that Reign Edgar had written to her about trade negotiations. If Rosalind's army was allied with him, there was no reason to fight. If they were his enemies, the elves would withdraw and wait until the conflict was over. She asked if this was acceptable. Rosalind demanded proof of her claim. The Queen turned to the Holy Maiden Era and ordered her to present Reign's letter. Era handed it to Rosalind, who recognized the unique magical seal at once. It could not be forged. She confirmed its authenticity but declared she would trust them only provisionally. Until she confirmed everything with Reign directly, they would be watched closely. The Queen accepted these conditions without offense, remarking that caution was natural in such times. Rosalind ordered her soldiers to stand down but remain vigilant. She assigned a specific group to monitor the elves throughout their stay. The elves moved quietly to their assigned area without protest. Among them, the blonde elf questioned why they should trade with people who clearly distrusted them. The Queen replied calmly that complete trust from humans would be unnatural. Despite the cold reception, she hoped Reign would prove worthy of his letter. She knew her people faced a turning point and could not remain isolated. As dusk approached, Rosalind's forces mobilized toward the border fortress. Their march was swift and orderly. A scout returned with surprising news. The banner over the fortress was not the Orvis Empire's flag but the crest of House Edgar. The report unsettled Rosalind. It raised the possibility that Castile's story was true, but she had no time to dwell on it. She ordered the city surrounded immediately. Whether friend or foe, the defenders would know that reinforcements had arrived. Cavalry units were commanded to cross the earthen bridges at once and storm Ashling. Her priority was to reach Reign before night ended, regardless of the cost. By the time they approached the outskirts, the fires had burned out. In their place lay blackened corpses, the stench of burned flesh heavy in the air. Reign stood among them, motionless, his hands clenched. His trembling came not from fear but from frustration. The destruction of so many soldiers, even as enemies, was to him a waste of valuable manpower. In his mind, they could have worked in his factories and contributed to industry until their last breath. Leah, noticing his posture, approached quietly. She believed his silence reflected compassion for the dead and sought to comfort him. She told him not to grieve for the invaders, as they had brought this fate upon themselves. Reign cleared his throat and began to explain that she misunderstood his feelings, but before he could continue, a soldier arrived at a run. The soldier reported that a military force was approaching quickly from the direction of the Orvis Empire, carrying a banner resembling that of his sister. Reign's eyes widened in shock, unable to immediately process the news. The scene shifted to the interior of Reign's office in the border fortress where an important meeting was taking place. He was hosting the queen of the Elven race, a rare and influential visitor. With steady confidence, Reign declared that the city of Ashling would one day become the crown jewel of the continent. He explained that those who invested now would not merely support its rise but would be remembered as its creators. His words carried ambition and certainty, a vision he clearly believed in. The Elven queen listened intently, her expression calm yet marked by hesitation. She remained silent until he had finished, then replied with a composed but firm tone. She said his business plan was intriguing but of little relevance to her people. She explained that the elves had long lived in harmony with nature without the advancements he described, and their lives had remained peaceful. Reign frowned slightly but responded with composure. He acknowledged her point yet stated that the Elven path forward would be difficult if they rejected progress. He argued that needs were not natural but created, and it was these needs that drove civilizations to adapt and reshape their world. The queen's brow arched at his words. She replied that many human needs were distractions to the elves, who lived simply and closely with nature. Human inventions, she said, were unnecessary complications. Her tone hardened as she warned that countless human empires had fallen under the weight of their ambitions, destroyed by their own insatiable desires. Reign nodded, accepting the truth in her statement, but countered that the same ambition had driven humanity's greatest achievements. He explained that the desire to fly had created airplanes, the curiosity to explore the seas had produced submarines, and the dream of reaching the stars had birthed spacecraft. He told her that one day, if she stood atop the highest tower in Ashling and looked over the vibrant city, she would feel the triumph of helping to build a miracle. The queen was momentarily caught in thought. These inventions were alien to her, yet his confidence was striking. She reminded him that the elves had lived for millennia without being ruled by desire, and she doubted they would abandon their way of life for a commercial district. Reign remained firm, telling her that if the elves invested now, they would witness a future unlike anything they had imagined. The mention of the future stirred something within her. She recalled a prophecy that foretold a dark fate for her people, a burden she rarely spoke of. She wondered if Reign might hold a key to averting it. Still guarded, she admitted his words were impressive but insufficient to sway her. She would need to consult the tribal elders. Reign accepted her caution with respect and assured her he could wait. Turning to Leah, Reign signaled her forward. Leah, poised and graceful, carried an ornate invitation. She presented it to the queen with both hands as Reign explained it was for the inauguration of the island city dam, the first step into a new industrial era. He hoped the queen would witness it firsthand. The account shifted to the previous day. Rosalind led her troops toward the border fortress when a subordinate brought urgent news. Reign was alive and overseeing post-battle cleanup. Rosalind was stunned, struggling to understand how he had survived an assault from an army of over 100,000 from the Orvis Empire. She forced aside her doubts and urged her troops onward. Upon reaching the outskirts of the border city, she saw the battlefield already cleaned. White sand covered the blood-stained ground, and tattered flags fluttered weakly. The rapid restoration created an unsettling contrast between ruin and order. Rosalind rode straight to Reign's office. Entering with urgency, she knelt before him, identifying herself as Knight Rosalind of House Holker, sent by Lady Priscilla. She apologized for her late arrival and offered to accept punishment. Reign regarded her coldly, confirming she was the knight his sister had sent. When she affirmed it, he asked why she had approached from the Empire's direction. Rosalind explained she had received orders 3 days earlier and had taken a flanking route through the city to cut off the Orvis retreat. Reign, surprised, pointed out the distance from Lady Priscilla's territory to the fortress exceeded 100 kilometers and questioned how she had traveled so quickly without a railway. Rosalind, puzzled, asked what a railway was, but Reign dismissed the topic and told her she had done well. Rosalind insisted it was her duty, especially after the disgrace her uncle had brought upon their house. Reign asked her to confirm if Caesar Holker was indeed her uncle. She affirmed it and pleaded for a chance to redeem her family. Reign fell into thought, then told her to wait before leaving the room. Rosalind remained alone for hours. Day turned to night without his return. Her resolve wavered as she wondered if her house's fate was sealed without even a hearing. The next day, Reign re-entered with a faint smile, apologizing for the delay. He told her there was no need for tension and that he wished to speak with her. Rosalind's anticipation grew. She believed this was the moment her house might be restored. Reign asked if she would be willing to become one of his people. Rosalind froze, her face reddening as she misunderstood his meaning. Rosalind was still struggling to process Reign's proposal, her thoughts tangled with countless interpretations, while Reign continued speaking with calm composure. He explained that her actions on the battlefield had left a lasting impression on him. Whether it had been her daring maneuver to flank the enemy or her bold solo charge, both acts had shown that she was not only courageous but highly skilled. He regarded her as an exceptional individual. His decision was not based solely on instinct, for he possessed a hidden ability to see her statistics, and the numbers were remarkable. Strength measured at 87, strategy at 82, magic power at 85, and leadership at 91. What stood out most was her loyalty, an unwavering 100, a value he knew to be almost unheard of. Rosalind responded with measured humility, saying her actions had been nothing more than her duty. Reign, unmoved by modesty, repeated his request for her to join him. Lowering her head, Rosalind hesitated and remarked that if his offer was a way to compensate for dissatisfaction with her family, she would give herself completely. Her words carried both boldness and quiet despair. Reign's expression hardened, his tone sharpening as he pointed out that her interpretation was entirely wrong. Startled, Rosalind fell to her knees again, insisting that although her dream had always been to serve at his side as a holy knight, if he required her body as penance for her uncle's actions, she would endure it without complaint. Rain stepped forward and urged her to rise, his voice softening as he clarified her misunderstanding. What he wanted was her service as a knight, nothing more. Rosalind, surprised, repeated his words as if seeking assurance, but Rain cut her short with a steady smile. He made it clear that regardless of her answer, her uncle Caesar Hull's past mistakes would not be held against her or her house. With a serious tone, he asked if she would pledge her loyalty as a knight under his command. Overwhelmed, Rosalind realized he had both spared her family and offered her a chance to fulfill the dream she thought lost. She dropped to one knee, placed a hand over her chest, and declared that serving as his knight would be the greatest honor of her life. Later, in his office, Rain sat at his desk, writing a letter to his sister. He reported that the crisis in Ashling had been resolved and described Rosalind as an exceptional knight he wished to retain in his service, requesting Priscilla's approval. When he finished, he handed the letter to Leah with instructions to deliver it the following day and to include an invitation to the inauguration of the new water dam. As he turned toward the window, his thoughts shifted to his broader mission. He still needed 4 more individuals with qualities matching Rosalind's potential, discipline, and loyalty. Time was pressing, and she was only the first. His focus was broken when Leah entered quickly, reporting that the Grand Duke of Castile had been captured by Rosalind's knights. Rain stood abruptly, recalling that he had forgotten about the man, and asked where he was being held. Leah confirmed the Grand Duke was imprisoned in Ashling. In the dim, cold prison chamber, the Grand Duke sat behind a heavy iron door. Harsh light cut across his face, deepening his grim expression. The door opened, and Rain entered with a calm greeting. The Grand Duke responded with disdain, predicting Rain's downfall. Rain questioned the remark, pointing out that the man was the one in chains. The Grand Duke smirked, claiming that Rain had violated a sacred law by using a forbidden spellcaster in battle, warning that such an act would bring the wrath of every powerful mage upon his family. Rain asked if he referred to Lady Selena, but the Duke dismissed her as merely high-ranking, not forbidden. He insisted the destruction seen in the battle could only have come from a true forbidden spellcaster. Rain realized the misunderstanding and explained that the explosions had come from barrels of oil strategically placed, not from magic. The Duke accused him of lying, claiming no noble could produce such force without magic. Rain dismissed the argument, stating that whether magic or strategy, it made no difference. His real question was who was backing the Grand Duke and what the true plan behind the invasions was. The Grand Duke insisted there was no one behind him, asserting that the Orvis Empire required no help to crush its enemies. Rain did not believe it, recalling that the Empire's invasions always followed the same pattern, entering in spring, attacking recklessly, then retreating in autumn without holding territory. He pressed again, asking if the invasions were really tests for something else. The Grand Duke faltered, offering a vague excuse about showing strength, but Rain pushed further, questioning if they were testing something unknown. The Grand Duke's composure broke, yet he refused to answer. Rain ended the interrogation, leaving him to think. As Rain left, he reflected on the unnatural repetition of the invasions. It felt orchestrated, as though he were being used in a larger game. If so, he needed to uncover the truth quickly. 10 days later, Priscilla received Rain's letter. After reading it, she smiled knowingly and instructed her aide Gwen to inform Velas that Rain had taken an interest in his daughter, reassuring him. Turning the invitation card over, she read of the water dam inauguration and asked Gwen if she knew what a dam was. Gwen admitted she did not and humbly remarked that she could never hope to match Rain's genius. Priscilla laughed softly, her curiosity piqued, and said they would visit Rain's territory soon to see the dam themselves. Before dismissing Gwen, she added one more instruction: gather several girls near Rosalind's age. She wished to know what kind of girl her younger brother was truly drawn to. In the grand hall of the Orvis Empire's palace, the emperor sat on his throne with a dark expression. The nobles stood before him, the air heavy with tension. One noble declared that the capture of the Grand Duke of Castile would severely weaken the army's morale. Another muttered that allowing Castile to act on his own judgment had inevitably led to this disaster. The emperor struck the armrest of his throne and demanded solutions rather than quarrels. He reminded them that seeking blame at this point was meaningless. A cautious noble stepped forward, suggesting that perhaps the emperor could send someone to Ashling City to negotiate with the enemy. Another noble responded with outrage, declaring that the Orvis Empire could not humiliate itself by dealing with such a barbaric land. A third noble agreed, stating that bowing to the Colladorial Empire would bring shame. The first noble, however, argued urgently that if Castile revealed the empire's secrets, years of careful planning would collapse. He urged the emperor to make the correct decision. The emperor remained silent for a moment before admitting that peace talks might be considered. However, he questioned whether there was a person of sufficient status, courage, and wisdom for such a delicate task. The noble named Craven perceived a deeper meaning behind the emperor's words. Craven believed that peace negotiations would not be difficult if the limits of compensation were set. Narrowing his eyes, he began to understand the emperor's true intention. The emperor turned to Craven and asked if he had a candidate in mind. Craven bowed and recommended Miss Wilvina, the only daughter of Duke Richard. A murmur spread among the nobles. One pointed out that Duke Richard had recently been imprisoned for offending the emperor. The emperor regarded Craven closely, recognizing his shrewdness. Craven presented 3 reasons for his choice. First, Wilvina's status as Duke Richard's daughter could display the empire's sincerity. Second, although young, she was known for her eloquence and decisiveness. Third, the mission would allow her to redeem both herself and her father. Craven suggested that the emperor could pardon Duke Richard in exchange for her service. Another noble conceded that the reasoning was sound. The emperor, after some thought, entrusted the mission to Craven and ordered him to ensure Wilvina's safety. Craven accepted with deep respect and pledged to fulfill the task without failure. In the dim chambers of the palace, a shadowed figure knelt before the emperor. The emperor spoke in a low tone, stating that Wilvina and Castile were returning. He instructed the figure to act accordingly. The subordinate vowed that both would perish within the lands of the Colladorial Empire. The emperor's lips curled into a cruel smile as he remarked that the death of the envoy at the hands of a Colladorial mob would give him another reason for military action. Far from the imperial palace, Ashling city bustled with life. Merchants called out their wares, selling fresh fruit and fish to the passing crowd. As townsfolk moved between the stalls, a merchant greeted Rain warmly and asked if he had come to purchase anything. Rain replied that he was only walking the streets to see if the people required anything. The townsfolk expressed their gratitude, praising him for improving their lives. One man proclaimed with enthusiasm that he had once lived worse than an animal, though now his life had changed. Rain winced at the phrasing and advised the man to speak with more care. He encouraged the crowd to return to work, and they sent him off with cheerful farewells. Away from the market, Rain studied a series of status screens before him, his expression serious. The displayed figures represented the abilities of various individuals he had encountered. None met the standard he was seeking. He reflected on the many days spent searching through Selena City without finding a single person who matched his requirements. A notification appeared, noting that his goal of cultivating 5 high-attribute individuals was only 1/5 complete, with Rosalind Hulker as the current recruit. Rain rubbed his temples and briefly considered asking his elder siblings for recommendations. He quickly dismissed the thought, knowing that they faced challenges within their own territories. The responsibility would remain his alone. In his quarters, Leah watched Rain with concern. She remarked that he had worked without rest for the past 3 days and urged him to take a break. She explained that she had sent messengers to post notices in the city, inviting those who believed themselves talented to come forward. Rain responded that such individuals were often skilled but best suited for labor in his factory. His expression darkened as he reflected on the halted operations of his factory, the lack of progress in the elves' investment, and the dam's slow construction, which would take at least 2 more weeks. He considered it a misuse of resources to have magicians studying chemistry, yet circumstances had forced him into it. Hugging Leah briefly, he admitted to himself that the system's latest task was proving to be extremely difficult. The quiet was broken by commotion outside. Raised voices accused someone of being a liar and demanded to know how they dared to enter the city. A confident response followed, claiming that this time there would be no problems. Rain's attention shifted as he examined the newcomer's statistics. His eyes widened as he realized the young man possessed exceptional talent in both strategy and magic. At last, he had found the kind of recruit he had been searching for. Armando continued his attempt to persuade the shopkeeper. From within his coat, he produced a small vial of shimmering green liquid, claiming with complete confidence that his formula was flawless this time. He stated that a single drop would keep any plant healthy and vibrant for an entire year. The shopkeeper's scowl deepened. He dismissed Armando's claims as nonsense and demanded that he leave. He reminded Armando that the previous attempt at selling a pesticide had destroyed an entire crate of apples. Armando grew flustered, raising his voice in desperation as he explained that the incident had been accidental and that his product was unsuitable for soft fruits. Before he could finish, the shopkeeper shoved him aside and declared that he would no longer be deceived. He accused Armando of scamming people and vowed never to fall for such tricks again. Armando staggered but tried to plead for a chance to explain. The shopkeeper ignored him completely. Accepting defeat, Armando retreated from the stall. From a short distance away, Rain observed the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. He had not expected to encounter such a character in a neglected part of the city. Leah noticed the change in Rain's expression and glanced toward the departing figure of Armando. The thought that Rain might take interest in the loud alchemist unsettled her, and she resolved not to let such a person mislead him. Armando soon slouched on the edge of the street, his posture showing clear dejection. He sighed heavily, lamenting the lack of worthwhile customers and the hunger gnawing at him. A hand extended toward him. It was Rain, who greeted him calmly and expressed interest in the potion he had mentioned earlier. He inquired whether Armando could explain more about it. Armando's eyes brightened instantly. Inwardly, he believed he had found a promising target. He rose to his feet with renewed energy, speaking with exaggerated enthusiasm. He praised Rain for his rare discernment and produced several vials from his bag, each containing swirling liquids of vivid color. He announced that he could provide any potion a person might require. Rain did not examine the vials. Instead, he asked for Armando's name and wondered why he had never seen him on the island before. Armando cheerfully introduced himself as an alchemist who seldom visited the city. When asked whether he had come solely to sell potions, Armando confirmed it and assured Rain that he could create anything to suit his needs. Leah stepped closer and quietly warned Rain that alchemists were often skilled con artists. Rain responded that time would reveal who would deceive whom. Leah could not understand his confidence. Rain pointed to the vials and asked their prices. Armando eagerly picked one up and again praised Rain's eye for quality. He explained that a yellow potion would make any object glow in darkness, another could enhance speed, and one would grant prolonged joy to a woman. Rain's expression soured. He dismissed them as worthless and asked if Armando possessed anything of true value. The insult stung. Armando could endure doubt, but ridicule was unacceptable. Muttering under his breath, he declared that he would no longer hold back. Leah detected the change in his tone and began watching him closely, prepared for any hostile move. Armando noticed her cold stare and nervously remarked on it, asking Rain if his maid always looked so ready to kill. Rain ignored the remark. He stated that the glowing potion was nothing more than a low-luminescence compound with toxic properties. He suggested replacing it with calcium-based phosphor for greater brightness, safety, and lower cost. Armando's eyes widened in disbelief. He insisted that the formula was his closely guarded secret. Rain dismissed the claim, saying it was basic chemistry. If this represented the height of Armando's skill, alchemy was unimpressive. Anger overtook Armando. Pointing a trembling finger, he accused Rain of stealing his notes and demanded to know where he had learned the formula. Rain responded calmly that he would never steal from an impoverished alchemist unable to sell his own wares. He then grew serious, offering Armando a choice. If Armando swore loyalty to him, he would teach the true science behind alchemy. Armando scoffed and asked for Rain's identity. Leah stepped forward and formally announced him as Lord Rain Edgar, second son of Grand Duke Aldarian of the Colladorial Empire. Instead of yielding, Armando laughed, saying he had mistaken Rain for an easy mark but had instead found a large target. With defiance, Armando declared that he would rather starve than serve a noble. Rain's face darkened. He noted that Armando appeared to harbor resentment toward the aristocracy. Armando responded with feigned humility, claiming he dared not insult Rain, just as one could not be angry with a dog. Leah's fury flared. She demanded that Armando apologize immediately or face consequences. Armando interrupted her, asking if she intended to kill him, then mocked her for resorting to violence over reason. He remarked that her noble pride clearly lacked restraint. Leah prepared to strike, but Rain raised a hand to halt her. He addressed Armando directly, stating that he did not care about the wrongs Armando had suffered from nobles. Rain explained that he was offering an opportunity to learn the real principles of chemistry and physics, to create something with a lasting impact on the world. If Armando preferred to remain in the outskirts of Ashling City, wasting his potential, that was a choice he could make for himself. Armando remained unmoved, convinced that the offer before him was nothing more than a well-crafted trap. He declared that nobles valued only wealth and status, while treating commoners as expendable tools. His refusal was absolute, and the loyalty measure Reign had been monitoring dropped from 50 to 30. The failure weighed heavily on Reign, for not only had he been unable to recruit Armando, he might have turned him into a future adversary. Armando's voice carried a firm conviction as he vowed never to believe a noble's promise. The tense moment broke when a young girl ran toward him, her tone light and cheerful. She greeted him warmly, asking when he had arrived in the city. Her name was Yelena, and her sudden appearance startled Armando. He questioned why she was in such a dangerous place and told her to leave quickly. When she asked why he seemed so tense, his eyes shifted to Reign as he warned her that the man was a dangerous noble unworthy of trust. Yelena ignored the warning. Her face lit up with joy upon recognizing Reign, and she asked if he was truly the same man she knew. Reign, surprised, smiled and asked how she knew him. She explained that everyone in the city knew his name and that her mother often said life had improved because of him. Her father, once addicted to gambling, had been given honest work on the city's dam project by Reign. That job had changed him completely, and their home was now peaceful. She and her mother encouraged him to work hard for Reign, knowing that his success would help their family thrive. The warmth of the exchange ended abruptly when Armando pulled Yelena behind him and accused Reign of exploiting the people. He claimed that her father worked like a slave for pitiful pay. Reign's expression shifted from surprise to irritation, and he demanded to know who had told Armando such things. Armando replied that he needed no source, for exploitation was the nature of all nobles. Pointing to Yelena's worn clothing, he argued that despite Reign's grand promises, she remained in rags, while nobles would never endure such conditions themselves. Leah could bear no more and stepped forward, telling Armando to stop slandering Lord Reign. She reminded him of what Reign had accomplished for the city and how his trust in its people had lifted them from despair. Yelena, now firm in her tone, confirmed Leah's words. She explained that Reign had provided shelter, food, and work for everyone, and that they no longer suffered through cold nights without roofs over their heads. She warned Armando that if he continued speaking in such a way, she would no longer speak to him. She reminded him that he had never lived in the city and could not understand what Reign had done for them. Her words shook him, and doubt crept into his convictions. Reign took the chance to explain that old clothing remained because textile production in the city was still developing. He promised that once their light industry expanded, they would have proper clothing, better jobs, and greater dignity. Armando dismissed the explanation, insisting that he cared nothing for such plans. In his eyes, nobles had never cared for the people, and greed was their only true motive. Yelena lost patience, declaring that he had ignored her entirely. She insisted that Reign was different and demanded he stop insulting him. Armando turned away, saying he did not wish to see another noble pretending to be kind. He told Yelena to be cautious, claiming danger always hid behind their smiles. Reign watched silently as Armando walked away. He knew that finding someone of such talent was rare, and he could not let him vanish. He stepped forward to call out but suddenly felt his body weaken. A wave of dizziness overcame him, and he collapsed before he could speak. When Reign opened his eyes, he found himself in a familiar room with Leah seated beside him, relief on her face. She told him tearfully that she had warned him many times not to overwork himself in search of talent. He apologized, promising to take better care of himself. Then he asked whether Armando had already left. Leah explained that after Reign had collapsed, they brought him back to the estate, but to her surprise, Armando had returned briefly to give her a vial of medicine, claiming it would help Reign recover. Without another word, he had left again. Reign's eyes widened, and he asked if she had used it. Leah shook her head, explaining that she would never give him an unknown medicine, no matter how sincere the gesture. Instead, she had summoned the city's best doctors, whose treatment had brought him back to health. She had placed the vial on his desk for safekeeping. When Reign examined the vial, its craftsmanship told him it had been created with great care and skill. He suggested having the city's doctors analyze it the next day. Leah hesitated and asked if he truly intended to recruit Armando, reminding him of his arrogance and open disrespect for nobles. Reign affirmed without hesitation, saying that Armando was not only talented but also the kind of genius who could help the city advance if guided properly. However, Reign understood that such hatred did not arise without cause. To recruit him, he would first need to uncover the source of that pain. Far away, in a small and dimly lit room, Armando stood alone. His eyes lingered on an old photograph, and the pain in them was deep and unyielding. Armando muttered to himself in a voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the air. His thoughts turned to the noble he had encountered, a man both unusual and unsettling. With a single glance, that man had unraveled the entirety of his alchemical formula. Much of what had been said had eluded his understanding, yet even Arena, whose judgment he valued, had shown favor toward the noble. His fingers tightened into a fist as he lowered his voice further, vowing to his late master that he would not be deceived. He promised to finish the research they had begun together and swore that the nobility would pay for their crimes. The fire of hatred burned deep in his eyes. At the holy temple, Rain sat in silence while Saint Aora spoke. She revealed the reason behind Armando's contempt for nobles. She recounted the story of Liesel, the woman in the old photograph. 15 years ago, Liesel had been the most gifted alchemist in Ashling, a visionary who believed alchemy belonged to all people, not solely the privileged. She had taken in Armando when he was a homeless boy, fed him, educated him, and entrusted him with her life's knowledge. Their bond surpassed that of teacher and pupil, for she had become a mother to him in all but blood. Liesel's teachings went beyond alchemical theory and mechanical designs. She instilled in him the belief that invention must be tempered with compassion, and that knowledge meant little without humanity. This fragile balance shattered when her research caught the attention of a powerful noble. Unable to accept her ideals, the noble had arranged for her work to be seized, accused her of practicing forbidden magic, and ensured the false charges destroyed her. Her life ended in what was publicly called an accident, though the truth was far darker. Armando had been only 15 when he lost the one person he loved most to greed and cruelty. From the remnants of her home, he salvaged what he could: torn notes, incomplete designs, and scattered theories. That day, he vowed to complete her work regardless of the cost. Saint Iora's voice trembled as she spoke, her tears revealing the weight of Armando's grief and his years of solitude. Rain listened intently before asking where Armando was now. Iora's anger flared, questioning his lack of compassion, yet Rain's reply was cold. He stated that sympathy alone could not feed the hungry, rebuild infrastructure, or advance society. The past could not be undone, but the present demanded action. Iora's frustration faded into reluctant acceptance. She revealed that Armando often returned to Liesel's former home, where her equipment and research still remained. Rain rose, noting that their task had become simpler, and urged immediate departure. Before leaving, he asked what Liesel had been working on before her death. Aora hesitated, then recalled a single word: steam. The answer jolted Rain, his composure breaking. He pressed her to confirm, and she repeated the word, still unsure of its meaning. His grip tightened on her shoulders as he declared that if her memory was correct, they stood on the brink of a revolution. This was not a revolution of politics or warfare, but of industry, one that could transform how people lived and worked. Aora, still startled, asked if it was truly so powerful, mentioning that someone had once dismissed it as a toy. Rain, unwilling to delay, ordered her to guide him to Liesel's home. His mind raced ahead of his steps. If Liesel had studied the steam engine and documented her findings, then her notes might contain the breakthroughs needed to ignite a new industrial era. In his former world, steam engines were relics, yet as an engineer, he understood their potential. With the right blueprints and experiments, he could recreate their power. Within Liesel's old home, Armando was bent over a crude machine that hissed faintly, its valves twitching. The sound of approaching footsteps made him cover it with a cloth and step outside. His gaze hardened as he confronted Rain, declaring the place off limits. Rain advanced without hesitation, asking for Liesel's research. Armando's stance grew rigid. He said the notes would never be given to Rain or any noble. Saint Aora attempted to mediate, explaining that Rain sought only to see whether Liesel's work could benefit the people of the city. Armando dismissed her words, drawing a combat knife and pointing it toward Rain. His voice carried the weight of years of resentment, marking the place as sacred. Leah's hand instinctively moved to the dagger beneath her cloak, ready to defend Rain. However, Rain stopped her with a raised hand, stepping forward himself. He called Armando blind to the true potential of the steam engine, accusing him of betraying Liesel's vision by hiding her research. The knowledge she left was languishing, smothered by fear and pride. Armando's fury deepened as he demanded to know what gave Rain the right to speak, as though he understood her work better than a man who had dedicated his life to it. Rain's expression shifted to a calculated smile. Realizing that words alone would not sway Armando, he proposed a wager. One that might secure either the cooperation or the grudging respect of the man guarding the last traces of a dream that could change the world. Armando folded his arms and scoffed, asking what Rain intended for the wager. Rain remained composed as he laid out the terms. If he could successfully activate Liesl's alchemical device, Armando would serve him without complaint. If he failed, he would leave Ashling City forever and never return. Armando erupted into loud laughter at the audacity. He found the idea absurd, mocking Rain as a pampered noble who likely could not name half the tools in an alchemical laboratory, yet now claimed he could bring Liesl's invention to life. Rain had anticipated that very reaction. Armando's laughter meant the challenge had been accepted. Yet Armando decided the terms were still not enough. He added that if Rain failed, he would also kneel at Liesl's grave and offer a formal apology. Saint Iora's anger flared at this demand, insisting that Armando was being excessive. She argued that Rain had done nothing to deserve such disrespect. Armando dismissed her entirely, claiming it did not matter what Rain had or had not done. In his eyes, all nobles were guilty by their very nature. Armando stared directly into Rain's eyes and demanded to know if he dared to accept the terms. Without hesitation, Rain agreed. If he failed, he would bow at Liesl's grave himself. With the matter settled, Rain turned toward the machine hidden beneath a cloth and told Armando to step aside so he could examine it. Outwardly he appeared calm, but excitement ran through him like a current. He quietly promised himself that once the steam engine was restored, Armando would have no choice but to work for him. Tasks such as lighting furnaces and maintaining pressure valves already filled his mind. Armando pulled the cloth from the contraption, revealing an enormous machine of gears, pipes, and metal plating. He warned Rain not to damage it, claiming the device was priceless. Leah and Saint Aora both stared at the mechanism in silent awe and confusion. Neither of them had seen anything like it before, and neither could understand why Rain was so interested in what appeared to be a mound of complex parts. Rain placed his hands against the cold surface, feeling the craftsmanship beneath his fingertips. The device before him matched his dreams, a steam engine nearly complete in form. After several moments of silent observation, he remarked that Liesl had truly been a genius in both theory and execution. Hearing Rain speak so highly of his mentor caused a flicker of shared excitement in Armando's eyes. He agreed that Liesl had been the real thing, unlike pretenders who wore alchemical robes without grasping the principles they claimed to represent. Rain then asked if Armando had remained in this place solely to make the machine operational. Armando confirmed it, explaining that Liesl had left no instructions for operating the device. Her notes contained theory and concepts, but lacked practical steps. Rain suggested opening the shell to examine the inner workings, suspecting that the issue might be mechanical. Armando immediately objected, warning that dismantling it could result in irreversible damage. Rain's expression darkened. He reminded Armando of his expertise and insisted there was no machine in existence he could not repair. He extended his hand and told Armando to bring him a screwdriver. Armando stared blankly, unfamiliar with the tool. Rain sighed, baffled that anyone attempting to restore such a device could be unaware of basic instruments. Armando, unaffected, explained that the machine had been assembled using magic. The components had been forged by dwarven craftsmen under Liesl's commission. It was, he added, far beyond what a sheltered noble could comprehend. Rain dismissed the comment and asked Leah for her dagger. With the blade in hand, Rain began dismantling the machine. Each piece revealed precise and advanced craftsmanship. His excitement grew with every removed part. Liesl's brilliance was evident in every detail. However, his expression gradually shifted as he worked deeper into the structure. Something critical was missing. He paused, scanning the empty mounts at the machine's core, and turned to Armando. His tone sharpened as he asked where the internal components were, the ones essential to operation. Armando hesitated, unprepared for the question, and then claimed the device had always been that way. He suggested Rain might be imagining it, perhaps searching for an excuse in anticipation of failure. Rain ignored the deflection, pointing directly at the vacant slots. He stated plainly that the control system had been removed and demanded to know who had taken it. Armando's posture stiffened. Finally, with visible reluctance, he admitted the truth. The missing components had been stolen by a noble. Rain's eyes narrowed as he demanded to know why such specialized parts would be taken. Armando's voice carried deep bitterness as he explained that the pieces had been crafted from a rare mineral of great value. When a noble had learned of their existence, he had them seized and melted down, not for research or advancement, but to fashion a grand statue of himself. A shadow passed over Rain's face as anger welled within him. The thought of reducing a vital component of industry to a vanity monument struck him as the height of arrogance. He demanded the identity of the noble responsible and where he could be found. Armando's expression turned grim. He warned that the man was someone high above, beyond Rain's reach. Rain stepped closer, voice low and steady, carrying the weight of his conviction. He declared that no one, no matter how high their position, was untouchable. The Industrial Revolution he envisioned would not be halted by selfish pride or political power. He ordered Armando to name the one who dared obstruct the future he intended to build.